and welcome to this second knowledge sharing session for this year. It's not March, it's June. So probably should have updated that piece, but just want to mention that we are recording the session today, and all the recordings will be provided to you all after the session today from Jessica. What we're going to talk a lot about today is different workflows related to what you can do in Whitson Plus. If you don't know what Whitson Plus is, it's an all-in-one web-based solution for everything from decline curves to PVT and bottom hole pressures, all the way through different subsurface workflows and well tests, including nodal analysis. We've also been super lucky to have a lot of new faces here at Whitson the last few months. Some of them are here on the screen, which is a mix of new full-time employees and some summer interns as well, that I'm sure a lot of you have interacted with already. Remember that we do offer this catalog of pre-small courses throughout the year. You can find them at whitson.com/training. They're 100% complimentary and free for Whitson subscribers. So if you want to register for any of those courses, you can just do it online, or contact me or Jessica, and I'll get you set up or send you the right link there. Again, these are very topic specific. We had one yesterday with Hamid doing a topic on RTA. We had one earlier this year on nodal with Graham. We had one on bottom hole pressures with Milan, etc. So they're very dedicated to very specific functionality inside of the tool. And it's also 100% virtual. We also have some courses that's in person, so you can also find them on the webpage. The next course that's in person, at least here in Houston, would be the day before WhitCon. And if you don't know what WhitCon is, it's kind of our yearly conference where we basically just have a full day of engineers and kind of our community and the industry together in one room. You can also join that virtually if you like, and we talk about topics related to well performance a little broadly. The day before, we also have a full day dedicated at the same venue, actually, to different courses. Last year, we did the same thing, and then it was only one kind of generic Whitson Plus course. What we've done this year is that we're going to have one Whitson Plus reservoir and forecast group in one room. We're going to have one that's more production engineering related in another one that's going to be taught by Graham and Milan. And then we have a second product called Whitson PVT, which is a PVT or a fluid data management platform. If you want to tune equations of state and that kind of stuff, and QC laboratory reports. So that will be a dedicated room where Curtis Hayes Whitson and Marcus Nilsson will be the drivers of that course in that room. So that's the day before. So if you want to come down to Houston, a day before, join those courses, and also WhitCon, you're warmly welcome to do that. And if you want more information about WhitCon, you can go to whitcon.whitson.com, and Jessica has put together a very, very nice kind of overview of everything that has to do with WhitCon. It's actually so that's whitcon.whitson.com. It's so nice that I'm going to show it to you all, so you can check out this web page. You can see how it was last year, and you can also look at some of the highlights. And we're also working on and getting pretty close on the program as well. That will of course be up there when time is relevant. For today, we have a lot of ground to cover. I'm going to do a super fast presentation, more of an infomercial, just of something I've found myself been using a lot since it was released here last month, which is related to the Forecast Manager. But then we actually have so many presentations. I know some of them will, just based on the slides, they will go over time. So it's good that I'm short. So Raul is going to talk about how you can quantify DLIM. Leslie is going to basically present the URTEC paper he presented last month here at URTEC. A lot of you guys have been asking about how you model jet pumps with bottom hole pressure calculations. We'll be including that into Whitson Plus, and Milan is going to cover that before Garrett from Petrohunt is going to talk about gas lift optimization in practice. Last knowledge share, Milan showed kind of the theoretical details and implementation of downhole chokes, and Graham is going to put that work into practice and show you some of the things you could use that for in his presentation before. The last three presenters will be James on comparison plot, Sam on integration with Whitson Plus and Snowflake, and in the end, Tedja that's going to talk a lot about these SBEE type well workflows that you can do in Whitson Plus. So that'll be great. My quick presentation is related to the Forecast Manager, and that's to get everybody kind of warm and fuzzy a little bit here. But I'm just going to cover three very basic things. Why do we need a Forecast Manager in general in a company? How does it really work? And where can you find it inside of the software? Okay, so nothing magic there. Hopefully easy for everybody to follow, and then we're going to show more equations and derivations and whatnot later throughout the day. The reason why we need to have a forecast manager is all of us were using these equations right here, the ARPS equations or power law or constant or linear segments, etc. More and more, and we see probably in Whitson Plus kind of some of the subset usage that's growing the most is related to declines, type wells, and auto forecast. And what happens when you do that for a lot of different wells, and even a lot of different cases for one well, is that you suddenly start to get like a 2022 case, a 2021 case, a 2020 case, maybe different types of sensitivities, and it becomes so many cases after a while that you will need to have some kind of framework or system where you can easily manage and get an overview of those saved forecasts. And that's where the Forecast Manager comes into play. So if you, for instance, have a exercise where you have an old forecast, you have new production data, okay, very common thing, and you just want to check, a quick hindsight type of study. How well is my forecast actually holding up compared to the CUME the last 90 days, the last 365 days, so whatever it is. And you can define that, how you calculate the error, if you want it to be an absolute thing, a real thing, etc., in the software, and run this not only for one well, but for all the wells, and then rank them and inspect them if you'd like. Another thing is like, okay, for one well, I might have several different cases. I did a forecast this year, 2025 case, and I had another 2024 case. Okay, I can of course inspect that on one particular well, but what if I have 1,000 wells? Maybe a unity plot and filtering on outliers there would be a more helpful way of doing that. So I'm going to show you guys that in a second. Also, when you're dealing with a lot of wells, so not like a few wells, but maybe hundreds of wells, it can be nice to bulk view them, and that's also something you're allowed to do and customize inside of the Forecast Manager. In addition to not only visually look at these in like a table format, but you can also inspect them on different distribution plots. So whether it's a probit plot or whether it's a CFD plot, etc., you can do that with all the parameters that we provide in the table format. And the table format there in the type well or in the Forecast Manager is there available for you, such that you can inspect it either like in a table, and you can design the table as you like and include the parameters that you would like to have. You can click each of the different rows to show that particular forecast, for instance, and you can of course filter on it as well. So that's what I'm going to show now very quickly in the second part of this presentation, is like, okay, how does this thing actually look like, and how does it actually work? So hopefully you guys have seen when I flipped to the browser here how the interface looks like. In this case, I'm just using my 2022 forecast right here, but for this project I actually see every single forecast I have here over time that's saved for this particular project. If I would like to look at any of the parameters here in a table format, of course I can do that very easily here. If I wanted to do the hindcast customization run, let's say I wanted to look at the CUME delta between my forecast and the actual data, lies 90, 180, and 365 days, just click save, and it calculates these parameters here for me. And I can, for instance, see here, well, here I'm over predicting, by 1,200 barrels, and I can go in and expect it here in the chart, and you'll see this is my forecast, and here, oh, something has definitely happened with this well that makes it understandable that there's a big difference there. You can also look at the distribution of these things in the filter. So the filter and kind of the statistics are merged together here in the software. And in the filter, I can filter on any like well header attribute that is of interest for me, or that I have in this table list, and it's a very, very extensive list of parameters. I can also filter on custom attributes. So if I have like a responsible engineer, you can filter on that. Or my favorite is to filter on irresponsible engineers. My friend James McDonald, that will come later today. You can also compare different forecasts, whether you have a 2022 forecast and you want to compare it to, for instance, the 2021 forecast. That will generate these distributions, and now you can look at the CFD distributions on the same plot here. And these can also be modified to be, for instance, a unity plot. So let's say I wanted to here have EUR, but I wanted that to be a unity plot. I can look at that unity plot here, and I see, okay, there's been some big differences for these two guys right here. There's also a probit option here, where you can plot either one or two probits at the same time. If I wanted to filter them to these two outliers, I can do that. And then if I X out here, you'll see this is the only list of wells that I have, and I can then go in and expect only these if I want to. The absolute last thing I want to show you here is the bulk view. So if I have a lot of wells that I'd like to look at the same time, here I have 8 of them at the same time. I can just flip through them up to the right here, either in a rate queue, or if I wanted to look at all the streams at the same time, I could also do that, and whatever view I really wanted to look at. So that was my little teaser of the Forecast Manager. It's a pretty new feature. I know a lot of you are using it already, so we have some very good feedback cycles there. But if you use it and you have questions or comments or suggestions for improvements, etc., we would love to hear it. So reach out to me or support or Henrik Berg, who's kind of leading that effort with Philip as well there on that team, and we'll be happy to receive any feedback there. The last thing I wanted to cover is just like where in the software can you find this type of functionality. In the software, there's 3 different places you can find it. One is the edit all. So that's, of course, anything that you would like to be able to edit on a big scale. You'll find that in that little icon up here on the well list. That's not only related to DCA, but that's all the different functionality. Also, if you're in the auto forecast feature itself, you can find it here on both the overview page and in the AutoFit pages as well. So those are both links that brings you to that interface that I just showed you here. So on that note, we are ready with the first presentation, Optimize, which is Raul from Oxy. And I'm gonna go ahead and both stop sharing, and I'm gonna mute myself and see if Raul can share his screen here.
Okay, thank you, Matthias, and thank you everyone for joining. Very excited to be here in this knowledge share. My name is Raul Rodriguez. I'm a reservoir engineer working for Oxy on the Rockies team, especially mostly specialized on the reserves. And something that we have been very actively using Whitson for making our workflows for reserves, like type well profiles, terminal decline that we're going to see in a minute. We have been done all of those things using Whitson. We have been saving a lot of time in terms of the workflow, in terms of the manpower, try to be more efficient. Since all of you know, the research work always takes a very detailed time. And that's something that we're looking to use Whitson and to make sure we can improve our workflows, especially the time using that. So let me share my screen and let me actually turn off my camera just to ensure I don't have any connection issues here. And also I only have one monitor, so if I won't be able to see anyone questions on the chat, so feel free to jump in and interrupt at any time. Okay, perfect. So what is the idea for today? We're gonna share a quick background of the rationale of this methodology or this thing that we're using in Whitson. Then we're going to discuss the terminal decline. We're gonna see a little bit of the data sample we use, the forecasting assumptions to be able to get this terminal decline, the objective to use Whitson Plus, and a little bit of the workflow, how to use it. And finally, some ideas about well filtering, because we need to filter wells from the initial data sample that we have. So that's the idea on that methodology we're going to talk about today. Then we're going to see quickly some results of that workflow, and then some final comments after that. Okay, so what is the rationale for the terminal decline? As everyone knows, the objective for the terminal decline is to ensure that we can quite of cut the hyperbolic DCA forecast in the late time, because we are reaching the boundary dominated flow. And unfortunately, we cannot model that directly with just a single hyperbolic decline. So that's why the terminal decline ended up showing, to make sure we can model this boundary dominated flow more accurately from DCA analysis. Also, it's very well known that there's been some early empirical assumptions across the basin. Most of the people normally use a 6% because we're coming from early time, and some others use 8% depending of that, or some people are using those based on early empirical assumptions. But there is also a need to start using data, because right now most of the basins, let's say Eagle Ford, Fayetteville, the Bakken, are basins that are very well developed, has data even beyond 10 years. And so right now we can be able to make those assumptions, or make a detailed analysis using data-driven data from those basins, and making sure we can understand much better the terminal decline at this point. And the other thing is, if we are using, for example, in DJ Basin, where we have a lot of wells, we need to use tools that can help us, also expedite the process. And that's the idea, to use Whitson to ensure their auto feed and their workflows can help us to expedite making forecasts for hundreds of thousands of wells. And then right now, as I mentioned, we can make sure that we can estimate this terminal decline with wells that has long data history and with more accuracy compared to the early assumptions we got in the past for terminal decline.
Excuse me, Raul.
Yes,
before going on, can you please, just to be everyone in the same picture, give us some, main features of the DJ basin you are talking about? This, I assume this is unconventional reservoir, right? But
that is correct.
because maybe we are from different places, and we are not completely sure about which type of basin we are talking about. This is why. Thank you, sir.
Yes, no problem. That's my next slide. I'm going to show a little bit more of the details about the basin and then talk about it. But thank you for making the comment. Thank you for that. Okay, so let me go briefly to the terminal decline methodology, and my next slide we discuss more detail about the DJ basin. The reason we put it here before is we can use this methodology for any basin. Again, the example will be DJ, but we can use it for any basin where we have the data. First of all, the methodology targets to evaluate the last hyperbolic decline on the wells. In this case, as I mentioned, it's DJ, but can be applied to any single wells. So the objective is we're going to evaluate for every single well what will be the decline rate at the last point of history, and that decline rate we have, of course, a producing month associated to that. So that's one of the main assumptions in the methodology, that we're going to use that decline rate at that last time, and then we will show some trends after that for when we have a full set of wells. Then after we compare for all the wells that last hyperbolic decline, we need to find a stable trend time. So you can see an example here on the lower right-hand side, where we have a comparison of the decline rate versus the production months for a subset of wells. And as you might know, the regular trend is in the early time, we will have, of course, a higher decline, because, of course, we were going to be maybe in this type of the history of the well. Of course, the decline will be higher. And as long as you are getting towards the more producing months, you can compare the same way with multiple wells and see a stable trend later in the time. And that's the objective, to understand that stable trend, so then we can estimate the terminal decline from that filtering of wells. Then based on that stable trend, we will find out the P50 of the selected time frame. I'm going to talk about more details about it later, but the objective is we will select a production month time and then calculate the P50 of the subswells for production months beyond that stable time. And then with that, we can be able to get the mean for the particular subset. In this case, talking about DJ Basin, in DJ Basin, we have Niobrara and Corel, which are two reservoirs that are roughly at 7,000 feet. They are both actually connected. Even Codel is a little bit more with a higher permeability, a little bit more, let's say, tight compared to Niobrara. However, those you will see later in the presentation how those correlates, but in this example, we are going to compare the two formations separately in the process. Okay, so let's go a little bit into the details and let's talk about the data sampling. First of all, we evaluated in this particular example, and just for this presentation, we evaluated roughly 10,000 wells from the DJ Basin that has both Niobrara and Codel production. You can see the split of the wells here. And also in this map, you can see all the operators actually using Whitson Plus. You can see this beautiful map with the different colors of the operators. But we started with this database sample. This is monthly production data. We use Prism to bring the data into, this is from Emberus. We just export the data from there, and actually in a single click to import, you can import the whole data into Whitson. Having said that, we also make this methodology internally with our operated data, and it's showing results actually very, very comparable with the public data compared to our internal data. Then another thing is we use the out of fit as we mentioned in the methodology. So we make an out of it for all of those wells to get the last hyperbolic decline. And we were able to use Whitson that within 5 minutes, we were able to just forecast all of those wells and then make sure that we can get that last hyperbolic terminal decline within minutes for those wells. And this is the plot we are showing here. As I mentioned, we are comparing the DI for all the wells, for all the 10,000 wells, compared to the producing years. And then you see the split between the two formations. The blue dots are the Niobrara and the red dots are the Codel. And you can see here by making this cross plot that no matter the formation, since these wells are mainly in depletion, you will have the same trend of going, in the early time, of course, having a higher decline. And then as long as you're having wells with beyond maybe 8, 10, or even 12 producing years, then we can see the stable trend at the later time. And that's the main idea to start getting that stable trend from that out of it. Somebody has a question? I'm hearing something in the background.
I think we're good.
Okay, sorry, thank you. Okay, and then this is the cross plot I was talking about, and the objective is to identify this stable trend, and from this initial pass, we might see like maybe after 10 years, we can go and refine our evaluation of the terminal decline. At the end, what we're looking for is to have the wells with the most producing years, but at the same time that wells that we have a very good data sample for our evaluation. But at least as when we make this initial pass, we are showing the trend. We can see that actually Nio and Codel, despite that are a little bit different in terms of permeability and the formation trend, they are pretty much comparable, and we can use both the same methodology for the terminal decline. So then in this...
One basic question, sorry to interrupt. You have drilled here 10,000 wells, right? So the question is, I know this is unconventional reservoir, but in any case, you have find a kind of non-original reservoir pressure. I mean, some kind of depletion, or in every case that you drill a new well, you find the original pressure.
Okay, first of all, this is decline curve analysis. In decline curve analysis, we just make the fit of the oil curve in this example, and that's the idea. So we have wells that will be early in the time, that only has few, maybe months or even small years of production, but you have wells that has already been depleted and has been producing for way long time. So that's the main assumption. We're not going back to the original the original conditions. We are just evaluating, as I mentioned here, we're evaluating just for every single well, we're evaluated the last point of the decline rate, and could be depletion if they have been producing for a long time, or could be in the early time if the well only has maybe 6 months, 1 year of production. That
I
answers the
understand,
question.
but I am asking because since you are putting all the wells in the same the same time. I mean, I know some wells have
Yeah.
been drilled before and later another wells, but in order to compare, you are putting all the wells the initial rate in the same time, and I am seeing pretty kind of okay. There is some kind of dispersion and range, but I am seeing pretty kind of same behavior. So my question is, because I know this is affected by reservoir properties, and one of the property is the reservoir pressure, and I am assuming because this is unconventional, you are not seeing too much variation in the reservoir pressure whenever you drill a new well, and this is why regardless the other properties of the reservoir that are affecting this decline curve shape, like permeability and so on. The pressure is also another important factor, and I am understanding that the reservoir pressure every time that you drill a new well is pretty similar to the original one. This is why the initial rate is also similar. Am I right, or am I saying
Mm,
something wrong?
I mean, you are right in terms of the pressure, but we are not comparing rates. We are comparing decline rates, which is differently. If we go back to this example, this is the oil rate. We can have any rate, let's say 100,000 as an initial PI. But the decline rate at the beginning normally could be 99%, 98%, and then in the late time could be, I don't know, 7%, 5%, 4%. So the decline rate is like the normalization, let's say, assumption to make sure we can compare wells independently of even if they were drilled on time or even if they were just recently drilled. So that's the main assumption here. But that's a good comment. Is that answers the question?
That's good.
Okay,
Yeah,
thank you.
yeah, it's good. It's good. Thank you.
And also, I think we're going to do all the rest of the questions after the presentation. I think we're going to do Q&A then instead of interrupting in the presentation. So please go on, Rob.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much for that. Okay, so just to going back to the methodology, the objective is to make an out of it for all the wells, having this beautiful trend of decline rate versus producing year, and then find the stable time in the later time. That's the first step on the process. Then we need to make some filtering as well, because despite that we were able to forecast all of those 10,000 wells, we are going to find errors, especially when we do out of it. And we want to avoid wells like, for example, that has maybe very short production data, like you can compare the green line compared to the forecast, or look at this forecast. This is just like a forecast with only exponential decline mainly. So those are the ones where we don't want to use for our final evaluation of the mean. There is other wells that we need to filter out, let's say gaps in production data, because what we're looking is to have an unstable trend despite that we have these issues, but it's hard to do it with the out of it. So we want to avoid those wells also into the final evaluation. Or maybe even wells that we have operational issues, despite that this forecast is actually not bad idea. Then you see how the shaking of the reservoir of the shaking of the oil rate due to operational issues is going to be hard to find out the last decline of the historical data. So this is the place where Whitson came in to help us on top of the out of it. You guys might see that we have the error rate and the error cum. So we're going to filter out those wells based on the taking out the wells with the higher error rate or the higher error cum. And then we're going to end up with a subset of wells that has a more textbook production data and decline, where the out of it will be help you to have a more accurate estimate of that last segment hyperbolic decline. So having said that, we were able to filter out from 10,000 wells to 1,700 wells. that were selected to have the final terminal decline evaluation. I mean, going back to here, wells that has this beautiful profile to be able to ensure we can be more accurate on our estimates. Also, remember the stable trend we were talking about. So we were talking about 10 years of production. So that was our initial assumption. We're going to go into details in a minute, but this will be our initial time where we find that stable trend. So at the end, from those 1,700 wells roughly, you can see the trend here now is the zoom in of only of those wells beyond 10 years of production. And you can still see the trend continue going down. But if you try to see more visually into the plot, you can see that maybe that trend might be maybe going beyond 12 years or maybe even 13 years or so. But we are balancing now the amount of data that we have compared to the amount of years we want to use for the evaluation. We want to have the more longer production for our terminal decline, but if we're having least amount of points, then we are also going to lose some sort of accuracy. So that's why we are looking to have a good trend where we have a lot of set of wells, but still the longest production of that subset. So having said that, and based on the zoom in of the plot of the decline rate versus the producing years, more or less we'd see like after 12 plus years of production, we will have enough data points to estimate the terminal decline. And then finally, you can see with some plots like the map after filtering those wells in Whitson. And then the objective at the end is to use those data samples to estimate the terminal decline. We can use that as a profit plot. We're going to estimate the P50 from these sample wells that we were talking about. So at the end, you can see the table of cumulative prof against the decline rate here on the x-axis. For Niobrara, we separated those wells and we make filtering for having the profit plot for 10 years of production, meaning that we're having the D-mean for all the subset after 10 years, then another profit plot for 12 and another one for almost 14 years. And you can see here in the table, unfortunately, I'm not sharing like the details of the numbers, of course, but what I'm sharing here is if we have 10,000, the data with beyond 10 years of production, you will get a P50, and actually you can compare I didn't plot it here, but you can compare that profit plot, and then you are losing the accuracy when you make the profit plot with 12 years of production and also 14 years of production. But at the end, based on the subset that we were talking about here, that we thought 12 years of production is good enough to have 401 wells, then we make the profit plot, and then with that P50, that will be our terminal decline assumption. And then for Codel, where we have less amount of wells, we ended up using 60 wells from 361 that are wells beyond 10 years of production, with still good accuracy of the data and be able to estimate in a profit plot that P50, and that outcome of the P50 will be the terminal decline we will use for the recommended terminal decline for each formation. And at the end, what we're showing is we can do this based on data-driven using the terminal decline estimates for this. Okay, so this is my last slide. At the end, we ended up with a comprehensive workflow to estimate the terminal declines, and we can actually use this within minutes. It's very important to have a very good analog selection. We ended up with 10,000 wells, so that's something that Whitson doesn't have any limitation to use those and to be able to use the analysis using that amount of wells. Another recommendation for terminal decline that we have been using internally is that we reevaluate this like after every 6 months or 1 year of production, because those older wells we have more production after that, and then maybe that P50 could eventually change. We have seen like wells after 14 years of production here in DJ, haven't seen like a lot of changes after that. But still, if we are like maybe in the Permian, which is still somehow in early time, somehow we don't have like maybe beyond 10 years of production yet. So that's something that you need to continue reevaluating when you do this methodology. And then finally, I talked to Matthias separately, but if we can build this Profit Plus into Whitson, then we don't need to show it in Excel, and then this beautiful presentation can be shown using Whitson Plus to get all together by having this enhancement into the software. Okay, so that's all I have for today. Thank you for the time, and thank you everyone for attending. I'm open for any questions you guys might have.
Beautiful. It's great. The forecast manager, that'll be the home for those profit plots. That's really good. I've always been curious, well, like where these DLM numbers come from, and at least this is a very. I'll just point them to this this presentation now, that you can quantify them like this, instead of at least just using something semi-random. No, excellent. If there's any questions, you can also ask them in the chat, and we can facilitate those. But we will now go over to Leslie's presentation. That's an URTEC presentation that Leslie did here 2 weeks ago at URTEC, and the associated paper as well. If anybody wants that, maybe we can actually send it out off the knowledge share, so you guys have that as well. Yeah, Leslie is sharing his presentation here. Just one question for Raul before we go over to Leslie there. Kimberly asked if the answer kind of DLM that you came up with, was that very different from the standard assumption that you were using when you talk to the auditors and go through that exercise? Raul.
Yes, thank you, Kimberly, for the question. Actually, when we present to the auditors, we present this methodology to support our demean. And sometimes the auditors, sometimes they do the forecasting. In our case, actually, we do internally that, and then we share to them. So that's why they have been very pleased with the methodology we used, and they have been like using very much the outcome of the demean that we have been getting out of this methodology. So then that's why they pretty much using what we're saying pretty much. Yep. Hopefully that answers the question.
Makes sense. We are going to give the word to Leslie there. We see the screen beautifully, Leslie, and
so can you hear me?
Yep, sounds good too.
Okay, cool. So do I go ahead?
Please go ahead.
All right, cool. So thanks for having me today. I'm just going to present the same presentation I had a couple of weeks ago at URTEC, and it's on trying to lessen the effect of bad rate data and one or more of your phases on the fluid material balance. If you saw this already at URTEC, you may as well go take a coffee break or something. It's going to be the same thing. Okay, so very quick overview. I guess since most of you are here do use Whitson Plus, you're probably familiar with the fluid material balance. But just to remind you, it is a method that uses production data and PVT data to generate plots of change in fluid density with respect change in mass rate normalized change in fluid density versus mass material balance time to get a plot whose slope is inversely proportional to the pore volume of the reservoir. As with all rate normalized methods, if there are errors in the rates, what happens is you get big errors in the plots that you generate. And what I was trying to do with this is trying to find if there's some way to lessen the effect of those erroneous rates. In particular, I was thinking of water, because in my experience, many times water is the most poorly measured phase as far as rate measurement is concerned. And so I was trying to figure out, could I somehow get rid of that and still get the data from the reservoir? Okay, so on the right-hand side of this plot, I'm showing the very first well that we have analyzed with the fluid material balance. It's a volatile oil well in the Permian Basin. And what you're looking at on the right-hand side is about 4.5 years of data. And so on the lower right-hand side here, lower left-hand corner, at about the first 2 years of production when the well was a standalone parent. And then they came in and they did some infill drilling. And by the way, the first couple of years, the data was fairly clean. Then when they came in and did the infill with 8 new wells, and then all hell broke loose. You got a bunch of frac hits and so forth. You got a bunch of noise, and maybe for 2 or 3 months you got data. Remember, each of these points represents 1 day, so about maybe 2 or 3 months later, you got it coming back and establishing a new straight line. And then after, I don't know, maybe a year and a half later, they decided to do a workover on it. And again, you got a little bit of noise and it came back to another straight line. The dashed blue line that you see on this plot is the fit that we did to the original Petrohunt. Before I go on, I'm going to just spend a couple of minutes to address a question that came up at UTEC, and somebody asked me, basically they were asking about the intercept that you see on these plots, kind of what does it mean. So let me try and explain it this way. Suppose you had a reservoir and you were able to very efficiently fracture it every cubic centimeter of it with infinite conductivity fractures, and you produce that. That reservoir would be behaving like a tank, and for that tank, you could show analytically that if I made this plot for that tank, I would get a straight line with exactly the pore volume, the slope as 1 over the pore volume, and the intercept would be 0. Okay. So it'd be going through the origin and would have exactly the correct slope. If you start reducing the completion efficiency by, say, decreasing the number of fractures, decreasing the fracture density or decreasing the fracture conductivity, what happens is you increase the time it takes to get to the boundary dominated flow, and you increase the intercept that you see on this plot. So for example, on this plot, if I looked at it, this is the parent well by itself. It has some intercept. And then after the infills and the bashing, you see that you get kind of the same slope. It's a slightly bigger probably, but it's around the same slope. So it suggests that you're still draining about the same volume. But now the intercept has increased, which suggests that the completion efficiency has somehow gone down. It's been reduced somehow because of the bashing. And then when they came in and they did the workover, you can see that when it came back, the intercept has again gone down. So whatever they did on the workover, and I can't remember what it is right now, so they somehow increased the completion efficiency. In my experience, and I left the industry like 2 or 3 years ago when I retired, but what I found is that the very old wells will have very old wells that were not completed with as many fractures per foot or whatever. They had much higher intercepts and much longer transitions to this boundary dominated flow. Whereas the new completions, which had very high fracture densities, very, very efficient completions, you'd get much lower intercepts and much smaller transitions to boundary dominated flow. Okay, so that's just my aside, and let's get back to the talk. Okay, so let's again go back and look a little bit at the theory. And the theory basically for the multi-phase FMB is based on an assumption. It is not a fact. So based on assumption that this rate of change of density, mass rate normalized density change with respect to material balance time, mass material balance time is a constant, and it's equal to 1 over pore volume. By the way, for a tank reservoir, like I talked about just now, this is exact. You can prove that this is true because this is just a rearrangement of the material balance equation for the total mass. For a real reservoir where you have transient flow, sorry, that dog kind of threw me off. For a real reservoir, we make the assumption that once it gets in the boundary dominated flow, that this is true. It turns out that so this again we kind of is an assumption, and we tested it versus hundreds of wells, probably thousands by now, and it always works eventually. Takes some time because you have to go through the transition before you get the line established. But it eventually works. Doesn't matter the reservoir, doesn't matter the fluid or anything. But it turns out that for tank reservoirs, it's also true that if you look at any of the components, oil, gas, water, or any combination of components, total mass, hydrocarbon mass, whatever you want, oil plus gas, liquid mass, that the rate of change of that density change with respect to its mass rate. So oil density change with respect to oil mass rate versus material balance per time of oil or gas or water or whatever. It's also constant. It's also equal to that same inverse of the pore volume. And if that's true, again, this is an hypothesis. If this is true, just like the first one, then I can write a multitude of FMB equations, and they'd all look like this. So I could take, for example, I could take the density change of gas divided by the mass rate of gas and plot it versus mass material balance time, and I should get exactly the same straight line with exactly the correct slope. And that's kind of nice, because if that's true, then for example, if I had a well where I have really bad liquid rate data, for example, oil and gas are horrible, then maybe I could rely on just use that, but I have really good gas data, then I could probably rely on the gas flowing material balance line to try to get more of the reservoir signal and try to get a better estimate of the pore volume. And so what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to avoid this very noisy daily phase rate data. So one question you'd say is, well, what about the saturation calculations? They also use rate data, and that's true that it does, but the errors in daily rates do not affect the saturation calculations as much as they affect the FMB plot. And the reason is that the saturation calculation involves cumulative rates or ratios of cumulative rates. And those are much less sensitive to daily errors than the rates themselves. Okay, so I asked my friends at Whitson to help me generate some data to test all this stuff, and so they gave me some black oil, volatile oil, gas condensate data, and we generated about 1,500 days of data for each of these types using sort of typical pressure declines that we see in the field. Okay, and these are the rate responses that we saw for each of them. Nothing really is special here. And then I went ahead and I generated the FMB plots for each of these cases, for each of the types. So if you look, for example, at the black oil, I have here the mass, the initial mass one, which you can't see very well. It's kind of in the middle here, these little gray lines. Also for hydrocarbons, you're just taking out the water, oil, gas, water, and so forth. And you get a family of curves. They have different durations, different lengths. And the reason they have different lengths is because each of these phases decline at different rates. The oil typically declines fastest, and that causes the x-axis scale to stretch out. And the gas, on the other hand, declines the slowest, so it may even increase during the depletion. And what that tends to do is it tends to compress the time scale for the gas. All of these lines, by the way, the dashed line here is the exact 1/PV for this particular for these particular reservoirs. And all of these slopes within 3%, even though it might not look like that, they're all within 3% of the dashed line that I have here. So basically all of them give you the same good estimates of the pore volume. Same thing for the volatile oil. You can see that the oil is really stretched out here because it dies much more quickly, and gas condensate even worse. Okay, but again, if you zoom in and you just look at each of the individual plots, again, you get the same kinds of slopes that you hope to get to represent the pore volume. So that's nice because, okay, so this just summarize all of that. Basically just what I said. Oil rate declines most rapidly, so that stretches the material balance time scale in the oil case a lot. Gas rates tend to decline slowly, and that compresses the time scales a lot. And everything else is kind of in between. Typically, I put water in there as well, but typically you wouldn't be using water. I mean, I can't imagine that you'd want to use water for an FMB plot, but it actually works if you wanted to use it and if you had good water data. So that's kind of nice because, as I said, if you really had bad water data or something, you could try to avoid using it and use something else. So let's do a test on this. So again, I just took the gas condensate case that we just generated, and I just looked at that 1 year of data, and I put a lot of errors into the oil and water. So in the liquid phases, there's a bunch of errors, plus or minus 100%. Normally distributed errors. In real life, the errors are probably not normally distributed, but okay, this is what I used. And the gas is perfect, bottom hole pressure is perfect. And these are the resulting FMB plots on the side. You can see the oil is pretty noisy, which kind of makes sense. And if I zoom in and look at the other two guys, then so this is kind of a zoom in on that. You can see that the mass is kind of noisy. The one that's least noisy is the gas FMB. So again, this suggests that I could get the best reservoir signal by just getting rid of all the crap that has a lot of errors in it, and concentrating on the data that I really have, the really good data that I have. So let's go back to that original well that I had and try to see how that works in a real well case. So this is the data for that Permian volatile oil. First couple of years of data, it's a parent well. Okay, and then they go in and they do the infill, and all hell breaks loose. Water goes up like hell, and water data is obviously wrong because it's getting frack water from neighboring wells. Then it declines, and then at some point they decide, let's go in and do a workover. And this is where they did the workover, and you can see the bottom hole pressure went up, rates are back to what they should be. And this is the same plot that I showed before. A bunch of scattered data here, particularly right after the infills. Okay, so if you just take the water out completely and just look at hydrocarbons by itself, and you compare the two plots, this is the original mass FMB. This is now the one with the water eliminated. You still have lots of noise. Okay, I mean, I'm not gonna say that this is a silver bullet that fixes everything. It doesn't, but it does help you to see, I think, a bit better the signal from the reservoir. You get the same sort of slopes as you did before. Interestingly, when the well came back on after the infill operation, this is the signal that we saw down here. You got kind of a straight line for quite a while, and then it gradually deteriorated and degenerated back to this. I think, I'm not gonna put the blame on anybody else, but what I think happened is after the infill, a bunch of fracks were opened that joined the infill wells to the parent well. And when the parent well was producing, it was seeing a lot bigger volume than it had originally. And that's what this line is saying here. But then those fractures eventually healed, and it started going back to this thing. So that's just an interesting point. Okay, I could be wrong, by the way, so you might just say, hey, this guy has Alzheimer's and he doesn't know what the hell he's talking about, and that's fine. If you look at the same thing for gas, again, you see there's a bunch of noise. I'm not going to try to tell you that this is not noisy, but I think you can see, you've cleaned up a lot of this stuff down here, and I think you can see the signal from the reservoir as well, a little bit better. And then finally, for the oil case is not as pretty. It's very stretched out. But again, you can see the lines that you have. By the way, in the limited number of examples that I looked at, the oil plot always tends to give you the most conservative estimate of pore volume, so the steeper slopes, and the gas always tends to give you the most aggressive estimates. And the hydrocarbon and the mass tend to give you the most, I guess, consistent with the actual volume that you can expect. But that needs a lot more testing. That's just an observation that I made in doing this stuff. So to conclude, all I've done is try to expand the original fluid material balance to look at other forms that de-emphasize production from badly measured phase data, and try to emphasize production from the phases that we can measure better. The cool thing is that you can get acceptable estimates of the drain reservoir volumes from any of the methods. And if it were me analyzing some of this stuff, I'd probably put all of them up and try to see what is the reservoir trying to tell me and what is noise. Hopefully looking at a bunch of them at the same time would help you with that. So basically that's all I have. I'm more than happy to try to answer any questions.
Thanks, Leslie. I think you mentioned it quite a little bit there in the presentation was a question from Pablo in terms of what fluid type would you kind of consider the technique to be more accurate? And I felt you discussed it, but maybe just double down on this modification.
Okay, I'm sorry, I didn't quite get your question. What did you say?
So a question from Pablo is in terms of fluid type, which of them would make, well, basically for which fluid type would you consider this to be working the best, this modification? Or if they're all the same, that's an answer too.
They're all basically the same. I think they're all basically the same. The problem I see most is with the oil. The oil tends to decline most rapidly in the gas condensate case. And so it tends to really stretch things out there a lot. And I wouldn't trust the oil that much at all in the gas condensate case or even the volatile oil. But other than that, I think it works fine on all of them.
We're going to go over to the world of production engineering. So Milan, we're going to dig up some jet pump learnings, and the next three presentations is going to kind of be in the production engineering space. So Milan, perfect. I'm going to let you start sharing.
Yes, hello Matthias, hello everyone. Can you see my screen?
Yep, sounds perfect too.
Let me see if this... Yeah, can you see it now in full screen?
Yes.
So hello everyone, my name is Milan Stanko. I'm a production lead at Whitson, and I was asked today to present a jet pump. And first I thought, because the choke we did it in a different way, that I started with the basics and then, how do we use it in the planning? But this time we will start opposite, because I think it's a bit easier to understand what the jet pump is doing if we start from the artificial lift planning side, and then we go to the basics. So consider we have a well, we have a tubing production, we have no wellhead choke, and tubing pressure is similar, close to separator pressure. And then we perform a nodal analysis at the bottom hole, just at the end of the tubing. We assume the end of the tubing, let me see here if I can change the pointer to laser. So we assume that the end of the tubing is close enough to the, where the inflows, the last point of the inflow that flows from reservoir inside to the well. So then we can make these two curves, which are the IPR and the TPR. IPR, the pressure I have for a given rate available from the reservoir, and the TPR is the pressure I need at that point to flow against tubing pressure or surface pressure. So if we put this system to operate, it will be operating there. That's the equilibrium rate without anything else. But then usually with artificial lift, we want to get a target rate which is higher than that intersection. That means that I have less energy. The IPR, the energy I have from the reservoir, the pressure I have is less than what I need to flow against that tubing head pressure. So the main question of artificial lift is how do we make these pressures to be equal? How do I breach those pressures? And there are two main methods. The one method is to try to breach the delta P, to put something to breach the delta P, and that is to provide energy to the fluid such that it can pass from this state of pressure to that state of pressure. And in this case, I decided to use the example of electric submersible pump, but it's similar to rod pump. You put the energy, you have variable speed drive, you are connected to the grid, and you send a cable with electricity, and then you power a pump, and that pump is going to breach that difference in pressure. So you have here some fluid entering from the reservoir, then you have the pump is providing that pressure difference, and then you achieve the discharge, that pressure that you need to flow against the separator. So that will be method one, what I call method one, to put something to breach the pressure. And the method two is essentially to modify the TPR. So in that case, one example of that is we use a gas lift. In this case, assume we have a compressor, we're having that gas, and then we inject it in the annulus, and then we have a valve close enough to the bottom of the tubing in which we inject that gas into the production fluid. And then the effect it has is that it's not affecting the IPR because the gas doesn't get that far. It's affecting the TPR, and then it's making that curve actually to be something like that. Since the effective GOR gas liquid ratio you have in the tubing, it's higher, then the pressure you need to flow against the tubing is lower. Okay, and then kind of you inject as much gas as you can to meet your target rate. Of course, we have here some other effects. Something else happens here, but we are not too concerned about that. What we want is that curve to be the pressure I need to flow against the tubing head pressure is reduced, and then to make that intersection. I don't need any more such a high pressure, and then I can make this target rate. Okay? So we come to jet pump, and jet pump essentially operates using method 1. It's a device that is breaching that pressure, but has some side effect, which is usually undesired, that is affecting also the TPR. But that's not by design, that's simply the pump, that's the way it works. It needs to have some power fluid to be injected, so it's also affecting the VLP. So jet pump, it's like that. So we have, in this case, it's a pump. Usually it's a piston pump or like positive displacement pump. Either fresh water or you use oil from that oil, and you inject it either through in this case, I'm doing it through the annulus, but you can do it through the tubing. That's actually called the standard installation. And then you have a jet pump device in which that pump is breaching the difference. But since the power fluid you're injecting just to move, to give energy to the fluid, that power fluid is ending up in the tubing as well. So that's also affecting your VLP. At the end, if you want to achieve that target rate, you might get something like this. Your VLP is actually, the pressure is increasing because now you have more liquid. Your gas liquid ratio is going down. So the pressure you need to flow against that tubing is a bit higher. But then you have the pump which is breaching that pressure difference. Okay, so that's mode 1 is operating in mode 1, breaching that delta P, but has the undesired effect that is also changing the VLP. So I put this picture here just to show that it's a balancing act. You have to provide enough power fluid such that you can get the lift that you want. More power fluid is going to give you more lift, more delta P. It's also going to affect negatively your VLP. Okay, and if you have too little of it, then you're not affecting that much your VLP, your tubing performance relationship, but then the pump is going to give you a lower boost. Okay, so it's a bit of a balancing act. Now we can go to the basics. Well, how a jet pump, how does it work, what it has inside. And it's essentially this. So it has the power fluid here. Don't pay attention to how the completion is made. Simply I run it as part of the tubing. Is part of the tubing, and it has two main components, which are three, I will say. You have the throat, you have the nozzle, and you have the diffuser, which is this part here. The power fluid enters, that comes from the surface, and enters to the nozzle. And in the nozzle actually is accelerated quite fast because you have a convergent section, and it simply goes very fast at a very high speed here. And then on that side, it's open to the reservoir. This part is exposed to the flow from the reservoir. Then the reservoir fluids come in here in this annular space between the throat and the nozzle, and they get mixed with that power fluid. Remember, it's water or oil usually. And then after they are well mixed in the throat section, then you take in the diffuser, you slow down the fluids such that they don't go that fast anymore. And then you get here a high pressure. Okay, so that's how it works. It's a device actually has been in use for like maybe from the 1800s. It's a kind of very simple, no moving parts, but it's actually quite efficient. So if you can visualize a bit what happens with the fluid in this case is that you have the power fluid, which here might come at a very high pressure. Pressures at the surface of the power fluid might be of a couple thousand psi, 2,000, 3,000, even 4,000. Due to the change in elevation, that pressure is going to increase. You might have a very high pressure here. And due to the convergence effect, that fluid is going to be accelerated at very high speeds. So some speeds you might find is like 1,000 feet per second, something extremely high. And the fluid that comes from the reservoir is also accelerating a bit because here you are kind of putting it through a small passage, but it's usually much less. Here in this case is 10 times less. Now in the throat, you have these two fluids coming in, one at a very high speed, one at a very low speed, let's say relatively low speed. So they mix together, and the idea is that this one is transferring momentum, is transferring energy to the reservoir fluid. So it's making it also go fast. And depending on the mass it has and on the velocity, actually you can get quite a significant increase in velocity. In a regular ESP, if you think about rotor dynamic pump where you have an impeller rotating, you're not using another fluid to accelerate the fluid. You're using a blade. Actually, the blade is pushing the fluid to go a bit faster. Okay, in this case, we're using another fluid which goes fast to mix with it. It's like, imagine you're in in a car and you get hit by another car going very, very fast. So then both of you are going to be moving at an average speed, which usually should be higher. And then you, on that diffuser, you convert the energy from high kinetic energy, high velocity, you convert it to pressure, you slow down, and then you increase the pressure. And that's like your discharge pressure. That's giving you like the higher pressure you need to flow against tubing head pressure. So that in essence, it's how the jet pump works. It's accelerated the power fluid. There is a transfer of energy in the throat. And then at the end, you have a diffusion process in which you reduce velocity and increase pressure. Yeah. Something more about the performance map. So it's not that we can get any combination or this pump will allow you to achieve all your desires. It's actually it follows like a quite strict performance map. And in this case, I have chosen here to have like a generic performance map. So here it's what I'm plotting here on the y-axis is the difference in pressure between discharge and suction. So that's the delta P I showed before in this chart. That will be your delta P you have to breach. Okay? That's part of that. And then you normalize it by dividing again by the difference between that nozzle pressure, which is usually quite high. Remember, this was a couple of thousand PSI, and then you know, due to the elevation change, it's increasing quite a lot. So then that pressure, which is high, minus the discharge pressure, simply to normalize and to get here a number. And here you see the range of numbers. It's 2 to 0, essentially. And on the y-axis, on the x-axis, you have the flow that comes from the reservoir. That's the mass flow total. So that includes oil, gas, and water. That's the mass. And this is the mass divided by the mass that you're injecting. So if you have values less than 1, in this case, the pump looks like this. So this is the annular section. The nozzle, it occupies a significant, the area here of this nozzle occupies a significant part of the throat. Okay, it's not like in this picture, but actually occupies a lot. If that's the case, your pump will behave in this way. You can get very high delta P, you can reach very high delta Ps, okay, and then you have to inject significant amounts of the nozzle of the power fluid. Okay, you see here that one will be the same amounts. Okay, in mass, talking about mass, but here we go to 0.0505, so that means that you're injecting quite a lot compared to the reservoir fluids. Okay? Or you can have the other approach in which you have a nozzle which occupies only a fraction, a small section of the throat. Okay, and then you get something which is more like this. Okay, in this case, the reservoir fluids can be the value can be much higher. You can have much more reservoir fluids. Could be for a high capacity well. Okay, you're not injecting that much power fluid, but then the lifts are quite modest. Okay, you can have less lift, which makes sense. If I inject more power fluid, then I can get more lift. But if I inject less power fluid, then I get less lift. But it all has to do with that, with the geometric ratio of the pump. So this curve is a bit generic, what we show here. Usually by the manufacturer, depending on the properties of the fluid, how much gas, how much water, densities, they kind of give you some curves. We are using in Whitson Plus, since we don't have access to this data, we are using a generic map that is using 2 inputs. It's using one coefficient for the nozzle. This nozzle has some efficiency that we are inputting that coefficient. And here, this diffuser throat also has some kind of efficiency coefficient. So we're having some values there, but the right way to do it is to contact your manufacturer of jet pump and you say, well, what coefficients should I use for my fluids and my case? And they give you the fluids and then your results will be, your map will be more accurate. Okay. Regarding software, is coming soon. We are now working on the last details and entering the phase of testing and polishing. It's not so simple as it sounds. But when you're introducing your completion configuration, now jet pump will be one artificial lift method, and simply selecting if the flow path is tubing, so that means that the power fluid is injected through the annulus, or if the flow path is annulus, that means that the power fluid is injected through the tubing. And then if you click here or to give more information about the jet pump, you have to give the measure depth where it is installed. You have to give the nozzle diameter and the throat diameter. Remember, these are important to know in which curve we are. And they are either you input the value or you select from a table. We'll have a table from like common or catalog values. And then here you have the throat and the nozzle coefficient, diffuser coefficient, which are like very important to give you accurate results. Of course, if you don't know yet, if it's early, you can use the default value, or you can see how sensitive your results are. And the fluid type, you select if it's oil or water. And then talking about the required production data, you will have now 2 additional columns, and people are not very fond when I say, we have 2 more columns, 2 more data to input, right? But we need data to do that calculation. But you have power fluid surface pressure and power fluid rate. And if you provide both in a BHP mode, then you're not going to be using the whole operational map, but you're going to be using just the nozzle equation, because the pressure at the nozzle here is actually quite close to the suction pressure. So we usually use that approximation. But if for some reason you don't have power fluid rate, you just have surface pressure, the pressure that the pump, your piston pump, provides in the surface, then you can use a performance map. You can still use the performance map to estimate, but it should be less accurate. In that case, it's important to have the right coefficients. So that's it. I just wanted to give you no big coming soon, hopefully to Whitson Plus, and just to give you some background how the jet pump works.
Excited. And especially for the audience that has been bugging me for years now about jet pumps, and I've been like, that's hard to model, and it also was really hard to model when we started to do it. So so excited, at least for the folks that use a lot of jet pumps. I know there's some of you guys out there. From one type of artificial lift to another, we're going to go to our friend Garrett up in I guess Dallas. And he's going to talk about gas lift in practice, and already shared his presentation. Garrett, the sound is okay as well?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yep, sounds good. And I'll just give the floor to you. Garrett is working with Petrohunt. I met him in person for the first time last year. Put together some really impressive slides here, and I promised him to give him some very difficult questions afterwards. So I'll try to see if I can follow up on that. But with that, just go ahead.
Again, like you said, my name is Garrett Stacey with Petrohunt, and I'm going to be covering some gas lift optimization that I've done here in our West Texas asset for the Strategic State Unit 23WB in Reeves County. So just that background on where we are. This is the drilling info version of all of our wells here at Petrohunt. The majority of our assets are up in North Dakota, up in the Bakken, and we have relatively new assets here in West Texas. Zooming in on West Texas, we kind of have 3 fields. Here's our Culberson Reeves field, which we refer to as Commander. Up in Loving, we have our asset that we call our Rattler asset. And down here in Ward County, we have what we call our Tetris asset. I'm going to be focusing in on the Culberson Reeves asset. Those are kind of the older, more legacy wells. I use that term lightly. They're still all less than 10 years old or so. So zooming in on our Commander field, here's our sticks on a map. The well that I'm going to be referring to is going to be the Strategic State 23WB, which is this well right here. And if we zoomed in and looked a little closer, these are going to be the offset wells. The 23WB here being the one of interest. If you looked at a wine rack view of our wells, the 23WB here and these 2 wells down here are theoretical wells. They don't exist yet, but these are the other 4 in the other 3 wells in section. So here's our production of the well over time, and pulling out our GOR and oil cut over time. Here in January is where I made my first gas lift rate change, and you can see it did have an impact where as production engineers we're kind of scripping and scrapping for 5 or 10 barrels of oil at a time, and that one we got on this one. Unfortunately, you can see at the same time here is in January when we get our kick up, and then our oil cut starts to drop and our gas oil ratio starts to go up, and we'll talk more about that here in just a second. The PVT for our field, it's kind of an interesting field because the fluid starts right at the either dew point or bubble point, depending on where you fall on the curve. And so we're kind of going through this phased envelope as we produce. it makes it exceptionally difficult. We're not sure if it's retrograde condensate or volatile oil at reservoir conditions because it's so difficult to get and measure, but it kind of all reacts the same, and so I don't know how much of a difference it makes with which one it is. Going forward, our production in Whitson. So here's a more precise set of production for our well. One of the interesting things about our well is we started to have real severe issues with scaling with our gas lift. We were historically doing single point high pressure gas lift with annular flow, and we started to have real issues with scale, and we're scaling tubing in the well bore and unable to get those out, and we're losing well bores. And so we switched almost all of our wells from annular flow to tubular flow, which cost us some production in the short run, but we haven't lost any well bores since then. If you scale up your tubing in your tubing, you can just pull it. Whereas if you scale up your tubing into your casing, it's a lot harder to fish that out. So that's what took place right here, where you see a big drop in rates. That was our change from annular to tubular flow. So the decline curve analysis that I auto fit before making any of my changes, you can see then that the changes were positive. The bottom hole pressure chart, again, this is where we changed our rates. And then here's in January where I made my gas lift changes. You can see a decrease in bottom hole pressure, and then it starts to step up. And we can see why here on the next one is after we made our gas lift changes, I didn't follow it quite as closely as probably I should have. And the field guys really like to just pump more gas on all gas lift wells. So if I had some success and started moving on to other wells and stopped paying as close of attention to this one, and the gas lift rate has gone up since then, which corresponds to that bottom hole pressure rising also. So here's the gas lift plot out of Whitson, which again, you can see the same thing, the high gas lift rates. And then when we changed to tubular flow, it dropped, but not nearly as much as it needed to. We dropped it more, and we get our corresponding decrease in our bottom hole flowing pressure. The material balance, this is where the interesting part for our field here, because our initial water saturation is dynamic number. It's not one set per bench or per area. It's very drastically changing over the field and over the benches. And so I've had a lot of trouble getting flowing material balance curves to fit, and fortunately the bottom hole flowing pressure curve creation is very effective in Whitson, and compared to all the other gas lift softwares that I've tried to use, this one kind of gives you the best chance of being able to get your bottom hole flowing pressure curve over time, and then estimate your reservoir pressure and kind of reiterate until you're satisfied with it. But again, this is why after I make a gas lift change, I have to reiterate that gas lift change, and then also I don't take off the whole chunk at a time, and I'll get there in a minute. But this curve here, it's nice to be able to say we have to be above that producing bottom hole flowing pressure with our reservoir pressure. The IPR VLP curves, I was doing this before they made it as easy to see multiple cases, and so I was testing multiple cases here. I'll just skip through this one. And this is the gas lift optimization curve, which I'm sure everybody's familiar with. But again, every time I'm doing one of these curves, I'm verifying the annular flow versus the tubular flow, and you can see we're losing half of our production on this well, but that's the decision that's been made. And our gas lift rate was drastically high. And so when I take a step, I usually take about a half a step towards what the optimal number is in order to verify that we're headed in the right direction. And this one, the response was so quick and so effective that I then took another step, which we'll see here on this next chart. This is going to be the zoomed in version, and then this is where I made my changes. So we went from 2 million to 1,600. and saw the bump up in gas and the bump up in water and a slight bump up in oil. That could be theoretically just noise though. And so once we saw that effect, we relatively quickly dropped it to 1,000 and had more success. I didn't make it all the way to 500 because I was working on some other wells. So then when I was putting together this presentation, I went and updated my curves, and you can see that it kind of matches up nicely. And this is the decrease in bottom hole flowing pressure that then rises with that increase in gas lift rate, which I have remedied, but after putting together this presentation. So one of the things that I've started doing outside of Whitson, because it's not available in Whitson, is I'll take the projected gas lift nodal analysis optimization chart and plot it, which you can see the blue numbers here are if you inject at this gas, you will get this oil. And I plot those, and then I also will put in our actual production numbers and categorize them by where they fall along those, and plot the actual versus the theoretical. And you can see it's not nearly as clean of a curve, but it's pretty interesting. And that's where when you see we're kind of getting this spike at 1,300 or so. And sometimes what you have to watch out for is if you do that, you will sometimes have just it's a low data set type thing where you have one day as you're lowering it where it hits that number, and so you get an artificially high number rather than sustained production there. But again, this chart of theoretical versus actual is exceptionally helpful when doing postmortems on the gas lift changes. Here's the updated production numbers where you can see the initial gas lift change took place here, and you get the increase in oil, and then it starts to fall back down upon the increase in gas lift. So now, as I was putting this together, I found some struggles in terms of measuring success, and this is not to do with the Whitson software, my own shortcomings. So one of the things I do is I put together a personal scorecard of all the wells as I'm changing them and measure their oil, water, gas before and after and get cumulative numbers. And when this presentation was going to get done, I obviously went and just took my best performing gas lift change and was gonna brag about that. And as I was putting it together, I also then noticed that my worst performing well is also right there on the list next to it. And as I was putting this together, I noticed, boy, that one is directly offset to the one that I was changing. What happened here? And so on the strategic state unit for WA, I'm going to just kind of run through the same stuff that I just talked to about the TOE 23. In January, I started doing gas lift changes and had success. Then everything went south. Here's the same decline curve analysis curve where after I made my change, the oil started to drop. The producing bottom hole didn't really change. My gas lift optimization chart kind of showed the same thing. We needed to drop from 2,000 down to 1,500 in order to get more oil. The liquid loading plot shows the same thing. We kind of have more total gas than we need. And here's where you can see I dropped my gas rate, thought I was having success, and then oil production started to fall. And so I went back to where the gas lift rate was and then raised it, and never really got the well back to where it should be. So this is where we changed to annular flow, or from annular flow to tubular flow. And in January of 25 would have been here. I started making gas lift rate changes. Oil started to come up, and then it fell on its face. And I've been chasing my tail here, trying to figure out how to get this oil back on, because now we're 10 barrels of oil down, and what's going on here. When I was putting this presentation together, while I was looking at the wine rack, I noticed we're only 330 feet horizontally away from the well and 160 feet vertically deeper than the well. And so I started looking at it as a combined well production. And as it turns out, our gas lift rate changes in January didn't really change anything. I got more production out of our out of our lower well here, the 23 WB, but I got almost exactly the same amount of decreased production in our 4 WA. And so my final thoughts here for my presentation are when I'm changing things, I need to be looking at a more holistic view rather than just individual wells. And if wells are in communication, in order to have a better grasp on whether you're having success or not, I need to be looking at combined well performance. And the final thing that I'd like to see in Whitson would be on that gas lift optimization chart, if there was some way to put actual production versus gas lift injection, and have it as a selected subset of dates so that you can pick the most recent days that are applicable. That'd be an incredible thing to have there for that gas lift optimization chart. I'm sorry if I went a little quick, but that's it. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Oh, this is beautiful. I don't know. I've never seen that chart before, but it looked amazing. So I don't know, Graham, who's up next, and Milan and Mo and whatnot. We'll have to see where it fits in the NOLA universe and Whitson Plus. So that'll be homework for our next speaker, Graham. There was a question about the kind of the gas lift optimization here, if that's mainly used for design or to optimize an existing system, and we answer that shortly in the chat, but it's primarily optimizing an existing system, so like increase or reduce gas lift rates, and then I don't know if that was Graham who shared the screen, but Graham, you can just share the screen if you want to. But we are working on capabilities to try to also allow people to do more of the gas lift design as well in the software. So very good. Also an FYI from Graham is that you can now plot 10 days of the gas lift rate versus the oil rate to see this range. So at least, and he also provided a little screenshot of that in the chat as well there, Garrett. But thanks again for our friends from Dallas. It's always cool to see how some of these things are working in practice. So it's appreciated. With that, Graham, you're going to finalize the last piece of the production engineering session today, and I'm going to mute myself. I'm going to talk about the Simpsons. It look like.
Yeah, can you hear me and see my screen? Okay. Great. Well, so I think we've all seen The Simpsons, but in the show, Bart Simpson, he's supposed to be 10 years old, but The Simpsons has actually been on for so long that in reality, he would be over 40 years old today if he aged like the rest of us. But instead, he's still 10, and he's still getting throttled by his dad in every season. And that's what we're going to talk about today, are chokes. So specifically, practical applications of chokes. Chokes is a really new feature in Whitson. And the question is, how can we use it practically, right? So that's what we're going to talk about today. So let's just review. What is the purpose of a choke? One of the main purposes is flow control. If we don't have enough compression capacity or surface capacity for a high rate, we can choke the well, either using a surface or a downhole choke. So the second reason is drawdown control. We may want to limit our drawdown to avoid damaging the completion, or just to prevent condensate dropout of the reservoir, which can leave some liquids left behind in the reservoir. And then finally, chokes can impact where wax or hydrates will form in the wellbore, because they provide a cooler, condition downstream of the choke. And so choke sizing can be important for those things as well. So if we have a downhole choke, like we have in this picture, how do we calculate the bottom hole flowing pressure? Well, one way is we can use the quiet side pressure, which in this case would be the casing. From that, we do a pressure calculation from the surface quiet side down to the end of the tubing. And that's just a simple hydrostatic calculation. There's no gas moving there, so it's a pretty simple calculation. Once we calculate the pressure to the end of the tubing, we do another calculation, a multi-phase flow calculation from the tubing down to the perforations. So this is one of the ways to calculate the bottom hole pressure if we have a downhole choke. There's a bit of a caveat, and that is fluid level or liquid level in the annulus. Usually we need to have some measurements of what that fluid level is so we can properly do this calculation. And we don't always have that, but that is how we get the most reliable bottom hole pressure using the quiet side. Now, what if we have a packer in the well? Well, that poses a problem, because now if we try to use the quiet side pressure, we don't have a physical connection on the quiet side to the reservoir And so really there's no value in the casing pressure when we have a packer in the well using the quiet side and a downhole choke. So this has kind of been a struggle for everyone in the past, but that's where we finally just recently included chokes. So what we can do now is use the tubing head pressure, and we will calculate from the surface down to the outlet of the choke, and then we'll do a complex pressure calculation across the choke, and then we'll do another pressure calculation from the choke inlet down to the perforations. And so this is kind of like, you know, the best way to calculate the bottom hole flowing pressures, especially if you have a packer in the well, or if you don't have a packer, if you're missing fluid levels, then this would be a reliable way to estimate the bottom hole flowing pressures. Let's actually look at an example here so we can see what this really looks like in real life. Okay, so for this particular well, this well has been producing at a flat rate. It had a small choke installed here, 24/64, and then about 100 days later, they increased the choke size to 32/64, and that allowed the rate to rise. So where do we input those choke details here? So in the wellbore description, in the same place that we would describe the tubing size, the casing size, there's something that says wellhead or downhole choke here. In this case, this is the downhole choke. So originally it was 24/64, and then later, about 100 days later, it was increased to 32/64, so half-inch choke. So that's kind of where we input those downhole choke details. So when we calculate the bottom hole flowing pressures, we get this green line. So this is calculating from the tubing pressure through the bottom hole choke all the way down to the perforations. All right. And if we look at the actual rates for this well, we'll look at our gas rate and our calculated bottom hole flowing pressure. We see that the calculated bottom hole pressure is pretty high here. That's controlling the rate. And then when there was a downhole choke change size, then the bottom hole flowing pressure was reduced, and that caused the rate of the well to increase. Okay, so everything's making sense here, right? All right, so that's kind of like case number one, and really the point of this is now we can calculate the bottom hole flowing pressures with a downhole choke, whether there's a packer or not a packer. We can handle it. All right. Now the case number two has to do with the velocity of the fluids on either side of the choke, and so when we have a downhole choke, we typically have high pressure on the below the choke because it's restricting, so we have high pressure, and that means that the fluid is moving relatively slow below the choke because it's under high pressure. It's compressed. Once the fluids go through the choke, there's lower pressure on the choke outlet, and that causes the fluids to expand, and they're moving faster, right? Well, what does this matter? Well, one of the reasons people might be doing a downhole choke is they want to control the rate of the well, they want to control the drawdown, but they may want to avoid liquid loading above the choke in the tubing. And so we may find that below the choke, the well might be liquid loaded because the fluid is so compressed, it's moving more slowly, and that can cause liquid loading. But then on the on the outlet of the choke, because the fluid is more expanded, it's moving faster, we may be above that Turner velocity or that critical lift rate, so we may be unloaded. So how do we plot this? Well, the red line is the actual gas rate that the well experienced, and then the black line is our Turner rate or Coleman rate below the choke. And we can see that again, below the choke, there's higher pressure, so the fluid is moving more slowly, and we need a higher rate to achieve that critical lift rate. So in this case, the well appears to be liquid loaded below the choke. The other gray line is the minimum rate needed to lift liquids above the choke. That's where we have lower pressure and the fluids are moving faster, and we can basically remain unloaded at a lower rate. So in this case, it looks like the well is liquid loaded below the choke, but above the choke, our actual gas rate is high enough to be lifting all the liquids up. All right. So again, just for people who want to have a downhole choke to maintain well control and rate, but want to avoid liquid loading above the choke. If we dive into this a little bit deeper, what we can plot is the velocity of the gas at every depth in the wellbore. And so over at this depth, this is the casing where we have large cross-sectional area to flow, and the velocity is only like 5 feet per second. So it's very slow because we have a big pipe, the casing basically. Once the gas enters the tubing at this depth, the gas speeds up. So now we're at 30 feet per second. And then in this case, this is where the choke is right here, the yellow dot. And so as the gas goes through the choke, it's at a lower pressure on the choke outlet, and once it's at a lower pressure, the gas is expanded, and its velocity speeds up again. And then as it goes up the tubing, it keeps speeding up because it's under less pressure. So we can basically plot this velocity everywhere in the wellbore, including on both sides of the choke. So in terms of liquid loading, we can see that both in the casing and in the tubing below the choke we're liquid loaded, but then above the choke we're not red. We're basically above that minimum velocity needed to lift liquids. Okay, so what this really means is we can actually predict if the well is unloaded above and below a downhole choke. Case number 3 is kind of our classic inflow-outflow curve that we all use. And so the black line is a snapshot of how the well is operating today. We're using a 1/2-inch choke, and this is where we're operating. And the question is, what would happen if I put a bigger choke in the well, let's say 36 64ths. In that case, we can just run that as a BLP case and predict what the new bottom hole pressure would be and what the new rate would be. Okay, so this is for downhole chokes. What if we wanted to remove the choke completely and just flow up the tubing with no choke? Well, this yellow line is what our predicted rate would be with no choke, and also keeping the wellhead pressure low. All right, we get quite a rate increase. The other thing we could do is remove the choke with this blue line, so just flowing up the tubing naturally, but operate the well at a high line pressure. So we can see that there's a couple ways we can maintain our rate if we didn't want to use a downhole choke, right? But what about wellhead chokes? Okay, so what we're looking at here are a bunch of different BLP cases. The scenarios in the yellow circle are with 2 different size downhole chokes, and then the cases in blue are wellhead chokes. So if we're considering the downhole versus surface choke, we can kind of predict what choke size would result in different rate constraints. So here we have our biggest wellhead choke. I think it's what size is it? It's 30. It's a 1/2 inch right here, and then this is 28 64ths, 24 64ths, and our smallest choke 20 64ths as surface chokes. All right, this might be the fastest presentation we've ever had. One thing I'll mention is, people say if I have a surface choke, when I want to calculate my bottom hole pressures, what pressure source should I use? Should I use the line pressure, which is on the downstream side of the surface choke? Should I calculate through the surface choke and then calculate down the wellbore? And the answer is no. Like, typically we want to use the most simple calculation possible to get bottom hole pressures. And so in the case of our surface choke, there's 2 options. We have a line pressure as our pressure source, which is typically on the choke outlet, or we have a tubing head pressure, which is on the upstream or the bottom of the wellhead choke. And our recommendation is, if you have a wellhead choke, there's really no point in doing the complex calculation through the wellhead choke to get the bottom hole pressure, because you typically have a measurement of the pressure on the wellhead choke inlet, which is the tubing head pressure. So our recommendation is, if you have a wellhead choke, use the tubing head pressure as a pressure source, and then you'll be able to do just a simple calculation from the wellhead pressure, which is, again, upstream of the choke, down to the bottom hole pressures, and that's the recommendation. But if you have a downhole choke, you don't really have that option. So that's the case where you would use the tubing head pressure, calculate down the wellbore through the bottom hole choke to the perforations. All right, so we all know chokes are important to control our well, whether they're wellhead or downhole chokes, and I'm excited that we're able to both calculate these bottom hole pressures with either a surface or downhole choke finally, and we can actually size chokes to meet that target rate that we want to control the well at. So nice and simple, but I'm glad we're able to finally calculate bottom hole pressures and do all these scenarios with chokes. So that's it. Happy to answer any questions.
First question, you're never going to do that on me, right?
Well, you're kind of far away from me, so I can't, right? I'm in Calgary.
Well, it'll be a long time next time I see you, I guess. Yeah, I don't see any questions about this. This has been kind of a similar thing to jet pump. It's very relevant for some of the companies, and some other folks have never heard about it. And I think first time I heard about it, I was like, oh, never heard of. But it makes a lot of sense. We are going to move to the last piece for today. It is a little bit more back on kind of subsurface, a little bit of type wells, and a little bit of data integration. So a little mix here in the end. And it's one of my best friends, James McDonald, that I talked about in my presentation. He's going to talk a little bit about what's new in the comparison plot, and thereafter we're going to have Sam is going to talk about some data integration with Chord, before Teja is going to round off with some SPEE type role workflow. So that'll be very good. James, you ready to roll?
Thank you, Matthias. Let me know you can hear me okay.
Perfect sound.
I didn't know you were going to run me down in your talk, so if I'd have known, I'd have prepared to give you a harder time in mine. But maybe I'll throw a couple of jabs in there along the way. And just make sure my screen comes up okay. No, thanks for everybody for joining here today. Matthias mentioned the term infomercial kind of on his talk. I guess mine's a little bit on that as well. Just to, as it relates to our comparison plots, we put a lot of effort, a lot of time, a lot of improvements into how we can improve the ability for you to look at your data a lot of different ways, group them, view, try to find various characteristics at a group level, right? When you're looking, a big part of a lot of reservoir and production engineers' jobs is comparing wells and seeing how they're behaving compared to their neighbors or each other or the competitors in a similar area. So a lot of what I'm going to do, and I'm going to start off really slow with the idea that there's probably some people that aren't very familiar with using comparison plots, so we're actually going to build one from scratch together to begin with, and then we'll get into some more of the advanced improvements and advancements and things that you can accomplish with our comparison plots here in Whitson. So mine's going to be no slides. I'm just going to be running through the software the entire time. And we're starting off with this well set that you see here. So these are actually example wells that come with the software. So any subscriber that gets Whitson, we have our certification courses as part of our help here. And with those certification courses, we actually provide the wells and the data that you can use to run through just to get more familiar with the software, get up to speed with using the tool. So as part of what comes as part of that SP repository of data that comes with the software, those are actually the wells that I'm going to use here for our quick chat. So I've got my 9 wells. You can see that to show off some of the features, I went and created a couple of pad names that I put these wells into. So Charlie Wilson, because I just saw the Charlie Wilson's War movie not long ago again, just reminded me of how it's one of my favorite movies of all time. So I know you might not have thought you were going to get a movie recommendation, but you just got one. So if you haven't seen Charlie Wilson's War, I recommend you watch it. And I got some Johnny Cash and Daniel Day-Lewis pads in here because they're just great people. So moving on to the comparison plot section. So I moved right into here. Part of the conversation here is how you can do more with less. How much, say, effort went into the setting up your environment so that engineers can have more time spent engineering and less time doing a lot of manual data loading and maneuvering your data. So if you're actively bringing in your production data and keeping that automated, bringing in your wellbore information, automatically calculating your bottom hole pressures, and having the software keep track of initializing your PVT, there's a lot of time savings there. That means you can just get into actually looking at your data, start understanding your data. And that's part of the premise that goes into this talk here. So then if I go right into comparison plot, right to that section, and those 9 wells that were in that project, so you can see I'm in that project here. I called comparison plot here at the top. I can go right into building a comparison plot. And this is the first, what we're going to do here at first. This is tied into our newest view of our filtering capabilities that are in the software. I don't have lats and longs on these wells. But if you haven't spent much time if you haven't spent much time in the software, just even in the last couple of weeks, there's been a lot of improvements just on the filtering and GIS capabilities in the software. So certainly check those out. But I'm going to go ahead and keep all 9 of these wells, hit add plot, and then walk through. And if this is your first time seeing it, congratulations, what it looks like to actually go ahead and build a comparison plot in the software. So we're going to start off very, very, very simple. I'm going to go to the edit button here at the top and go ahead and just plot an oil rate on a semi-log versus time comparison plot. Just need to turn on all my wells, and then boom, they all show up. You can see that our default color, if I'm picking oil, we're going to give different shades of oil, but I can certainly go and spread all of those colors out. Be a little bit easier to distinguish each one by each other. If you get some data that's a little bit ratty, a little bit jumpy like that, we have our smoothing functionality here at the top as well. So I can go and then just smooth all of them at once and maybe just drag that over a little bit, make it a little bit easier to see. So then starting to warm up here with just a little bit of the, all right, see, I'm reading the comments as they're coming in too. Just clean things up a little bit, make it a little bit easier to see. So then we start getting into some of more of the, we'll start jumping right into some of the more enhancements, some more improvements that we put in. So step 1, I'll go to the open the layout and design here. And just as a very simple, something to put everything on an even keel, I can immediately go in and normalize my production a number of different ways, but I'll just keep it simple and say, well, let's normalize everything to 1,000 feet of lateral length for all of my wells. Hit save, and they just jumped around a little bit. So now everything's been normalized to an equivalent 1,000-foot lateral length for all of these wells. If I ran forecasts on these wells, I can view the forecast from a number of ways that you can forecast in the software, which also then includes the ability for you to turn on your DCA forecast. So I'm going to go and turn on the decline forecasts that are associated to all these wells and bulk apply that to all of them at the same time and hit save. So I can view all the forecasts as well as the production history here at the same time. Just to show you how I did that again, and I'll just go ahead and show it to be the same functionality to turn them off. I can go ahead and then go to none, hit save, and now I'm back to, oh, I didn't apply it. Go to none and apply, and then hit save, and then turns them off and on. Right. So even just the ability to turn on your forecast, I think is new to a lot of people, that you can actually view them in here. And that's just introducing the idea of being able to turn on your future behavior, like turn on your future forecast as a decline. But there's, whether you're looking at cum time or rate time or looking at forecasts that come from other sources in the software, you can turn on and view those in the software as well. So if I wanted to, and you notice that I'm going back to referencing my pad names that I had put in there. So when it comes to the coloring, there's a number of coloring options in here. We've actually improved on the, if I had multiple charts, how I could push my colors and how I decided to configure my curves across multiple charts. So we put some additional ones in there, including I can color by an attribute. So I could go and color by my pad name. And then it'll pick some default colors for you. You can certainly modify and change those yourself. You'll see more of this configuring your colors and different parts of your curves here in a second. I'll hit save there. So now it breaks everything out by the color of the pad that the wells are actually in. And just so you can see the difference, if I go back to just spreading my colors, right now everything has its own individual color. And now we're getting into a big, and a lot of this has just been kind of building up to one really big addition that's been put into the software here very recently. If I go back to this open layout and design, and so again, so when you go open out, when you click the button here, open layout and design, it brings you right to this layout and design tab. When you click on the edit button here, it brings up the same window, but it starts you off at what do you want on your y-axis, what do you want on your x-axis. So under the layout and design, I have the ability to aggregate my production. I could just aggregate them all and just calculate one total sum of all of the production or whatever I have displayed on my plot, or I can calculate and aggregate and then break it up by an attribute. And in this case, I'm going to pick my pad name again. So now I've got my, I've aggregated the production from all my wells, but broken up into categories of their individual pad name. But when you go into here, actually, I'll even show you that I can still go in here and then turn on my forecast and apply my forecast to all these wells and hit save. So now I've got my aggregated totals by each pad, but I've also got the forecast because it added up the forecast for all of those here at the same time as well. But then when I go back into my layout and design, I can actually select which aggregation method I prefer to use. Instead of just a sum of the production for all of the wells broken up by pad, I can choose to calculate an average. So an average production now for each individual pad for all of these wells that are associated to those pads, and I hit save here, and I still left my forecast turned on, but now I'm looking at the average producing rate for each pad, which also includes the forecast that I determined for each well. So this is a walkthrough, so it's a lot of clicking that I went through there, but just kind of shows how you can kind of keep petering further and further into the workflow, just highlighting a lot of the features and a lot of the improvements that we've put into the tool, right? So just basic functionality, and everything that we've done so far has just been based on volumes, right? Just kept it very simple, just looking at, start off with a rate time, and you can look at a single well, a bunch of wells broken up by different areas, groups, categories, type curve areas, whatever it is. So all different options. If I did this exact same work in that exact same workflow that I just performed here, I'm just going to go show you that I have a pre-built comparison plot where I took that exact same workflow, but I showed it instead of a rate time, I look at my cum times through time. So this is looking at just a cum through time for all of these wells, just the raw data. And then the difference between this chart and this chart is that I normalized the production to 1,000 feet. And you can see the names here to Charlie Wilson, Johnny Cash, and Daniel Day-Lewis. Johnny Cash wells certainly, improve a little bit compared to some of the other wells in the middle, just by normalizing them to 1,000 feet. What you're seeing here then is the broken up by pad name. So then, or divided by pad name for all of them. And I'm showing the aggregate or the sum. And then this is showing then now the average of each of those. So just a way to kind of highlight that same workflow of just a different functionality, but showing it on 4 different charts here at once, which also highlights the fact that you can have up to 4 different charts and they can all do their own different thing. Here, I'm just using these wells to kind of walk through that step of showing off some of that functionality that we had put in here. But again, everything that we're doing to this point is just utilizing the volumes and the volumes through time. And obviously a big part of using Whitson, big part of why a lot of people on this call are using Whitson, has to do with incorporating the ability to look at your rates and your pressures at the same time. And what I was mentioning at the beginning, a lot of the work, and we're seeing this very commonly with a lot of workflows with a lot of our customers, is that going right from, opening up the software, making sure that you have your bottom hole pressures, you have your rates, coming right into the comparison plots. This is a great way for you to look at a lot of your wells, a lot of your data in very similar ways of how you're familiar with walking through the analysis of your individual wells. So what I mean by that is, one, if you're not, put in functionality into the tool so that you don't have to spend a lot of time initializing your PVT for each individual well and calculating your bottom hole pressures for each individual well, right? In the wells page, and this is what I had done with this particular project, I had turned on all my wells and then told the software that I want to run my PVT and I want to run my bottom hole pressures for all of these wells. And I can go and select how I want to initialize my PVT and how I want to calculate those bottom hole pressures and select which correlation that I want to use, just showing off that there's some bulk capabilities of applying a lot of this fundamental stuff to your wells, so that you're not spending a lot of time going well by well individually, just to set up that you have the basics performed. And as long as you have those basics, so you have initialized PVT and you have your bottom hole pressures calculated, then that opens up the ability for you to build some more technical charts and some more technical plots. And examples of that are this 4 plot that I've created here to just highlight this data for these same wells in a couple of different ways. So I'm going to walk through these slowly, each one of them kind of shows a little bit of, improvements and things that we've done in the past, and some of these are probably charts that you've built in the past. We can certainly talk about some of these, but even when you just go to the editing tab here at the top and you click on the drop down, there's obviously a lot of things that you can plot, so you get more familiar with what can you plot and what data can you visualize and compare from well to well, just by spending a little bit more time in here. For the most part, if you know the name, you want rate normalized pressure, or you want a square root time, material balance time, you just start typing it in, and it does a good job of filtering it down for you. In this case, I'm just taking a look at what my drawdown versus my cum oil looks like, right? Just to get a sense of, how much drawdown have I imposed on this well through time to achieve a certain cumulative volume of oil, and then being able to compare that for a number of wells. I also put in a secondary axis where I can also take a look at, let me blow that up a little bit. I put a secondary axis just so I could take a look at what my GOR looks like through time as well. Just to see if there's a trend there, or which GOR is starting to kind of take off from me, maybe compared to its other ones around it. But just to show that you can have multiple scale or multiple axes on here and look at your data a couple of different ways. But it also introduces the ability for you to incorporate your pressures into your analysis or into your interpretation of looking at your data. Very commonly used plot would be this one here, where I'm literally just looking at my pressure normalized rate on a log scale using material balance time, right? So it's nice to be able to see a PNR plot very quickly and comparing that from well to well, where generally the higher the well shows up on a plot like this, the better the well, the less amount of drawdown to achieve a similar rate. Right, so then the lower that is, the more concerned you might be about its performance. But one of the things that we put in here is to help with some flow regime identification is that now you can also turn on, and you had this before, but with the improvement is the ability for you to turn on multiples of these, so you can add as many of these as you want. So I could add multiple half slopes onto my chart. I'm just going to put on one on here so you can see that I can use my half slope to kind of compare where my linear signal might be in my data. And I can also come in here and then turn on multiple, but I'll just turn on one unit slope. I'll make that a different color, put that on here, and then start using that to compare where my data might be telling me that there's, that transition point from a more transient behavior to a more boundary dominated behavior. So then just the ability to turn on multiple interpretation lines or, slope regime ID lines. It was one of the things that came in here in the last couple of months. The bottom left-hand chart, arguably one of the more popular, especially in anything to do with unconventionals, ways to look at data, famously known as just your simple square root time plot, right? So this is looking at my square root time plot for all of these wells at the same time. And if I zoom into my area here a little bit, and one of the things that we did link, if you did go ahead and perform the analysis and went through the analytical RTA of the software and actually put a slope and a line through your data, you can actually turn that on and view what your interpretation looks like on here as well. So you can just view the raw data itself, right? So again, here the shallower slope tends to identify a bigger A root K, so maybe a better performing well, and then a shallower slope would be the opposite. And being able to see what the interpretation actually looks like from the work that you've done, is very interesting, very valuable there. And then on the far right hand side, this is looking at our flowing material balance. Right, so this is the only one on here where I actually needed to do something in my interpretation, or or like on the individual wells, I actually had to run that flowing material balance to be able to generate this chart. But again, I didn't actually go to each individual well and hit run flow material balance for each well. I just went to the wells tab and then ran the flow material balance there. So I bulk ran it and then came into here and then all my data showed up. What this also shows me is that, you know, I did go ahead and then utilize my pad names again. And so you can see by the different categories, the Charlie Wilsons, the Johnny Cashes, and the Daniel Day-Lewises, kind of where my flow material balance is, what my flow balance is telling me. And then these are all connected. And I haven't clicked on any of these yet. But if I go ahead and then pick on, for example, this well here at the top, the one that would have kind of the higher, the more steeper slope on my flow material balance is the one that tends to have kind of the quickest departure and then the highest and arguably the steeper slope on my A root K, which is the lower performer on my PNR plot, which is also the one that has the highest drawdown to the relative cumulative oil and kind of the highest GOR on this chart. So just as a quick way to highlight, you know, one well versus another to kind of see, well, all these charts are working together and you're looking at your data a bunch of different ways, how they're all interacting with each other in here. So this starts really highlighting more of how people are really utilizing the ability to use comparison charts and then looking at your comparison plots just to make sense of your information, how your wells are performing next to each other. And one of the big additions that we put in is the ability for you to look at, you know, your future performance, your forecasting, your interpretive lines, your analysis that comes from the individual well analysis on these charts here at the same time. So this is a big part of really what I wanted to show, but it leads to the last category and then the last big value add that we've put in. And even the people that are in here all the time and working in comparison plots on a daily basis may not be aware that we've actually gotten to this point and put this in here. And if you have, well, congratulations. But I'll go back to my comparison plot. And then the last one that I put in here, and I called it, and it's going to show you exactly what I mean. You'll see exactly what I mean as soon as it pops up. You have the ability, in addition to be able to build your time series plots, you can incorporate your cross plots in here as well. To build a cross plot in our comparison plots, when you click on creating a plot, so they edit the first time, the drop down here at the very top, there's a drop down here that either the default's always going to be a time series plot. So similarly, you see the PNR plot in the bottom right hand corner here. We also have this cross plot option right there. So as long as you turn on cross plot, now all of the options of what you can cross plot your y-axis to your x-axis just show up here in this list. I kept it very simple for this example, right? I made everything related to EUR. So I got my IP30 per EUR. I got my prop and pump by EUR, and I've got my analytical RTA, my A root K for my analytical RTA, or my LFP or my A root K for my analytical RTA slope versus EUR. And then the same rules apply. If I picked on kind of the more dog of my wells, I can see how its performance is as it relates to how much did I pump for proppant, you know, what was my A root K slope. And if I look at this one, kind of the outlier out of all these wells, I'll turn this one off, right? And then the question that everybody, or, you know, everybody just looking at this plot, if you're just looking at holistic view of trying to learn something, you know, we're all kind of wondering, well, let's find more of this rock over here, because this well certainly seems to be outperforming across the board on all the charts that we've looked at compared to everyone in here. But the ability to view, you know, cross plot virtually anything by anything that you would want to see what kind of trend or see what kind of information that you're learning, and the combination of your cross plots with your time series plots, there's a lot of value there. And I think this certainly opens up the window for people, you know, to get even more creative on a lot of these default and templates that they're building, and even, you know, sponsoring different ideas of how someone should be looking at the performance or gauging the performance of their wells. There's a lot of different topics we can get into in here, right? Additional improvements as it relates to just, you know, how we want to monitor data on flowback or long-term production data, or if you're running a whole bunch of different simulations on a single well. And I'll just mention that if I came in here and I ran a bunch of simulations on an individual well, right? So that would be every well has multiple scenarios. Well, every individual scenario shows up as an option as something that you can chart on here as well. I'll leave it at that for now, but I love all of the additional functionality that we put into the cross plotting just to make the ability for you to look at, compare, make sense of your data for, you know, larger groups of wells. Being able to group the wells and calculate the averages of those groups has been what we wanted to highlight. And I think I've had a lot of coffee this morning, Matthias, because I talked really, really quick through that, but I think I used up just about the appropriate amount of time.
No, I love it. You know, I gave you a title. You didn't even know what the title was, but it was comparison plot and why I'm excited. And you know, so a lot of people are excited about comparison plots, but I think you're up there on at least the top three tree list, so it's great. And I saw a lot of good comments in the with a lot of things we're actually working on the comparison plot. It's amazing. Now we have dedicated people who only work on improving the comparison plot and whatnot. So that's it's been a very, very cool investment the last year or so. We're going to round off today with a presentation by my other very good friend. Some people might know him as Venkata Shavali. Other people that know him well, they will call him Teja. So on that front, are you ready to roll, my friend? I think you're muted.
Yeah, I should be. Awesome.
Perfect.
You just share. Okay, everybody can see my screen now? Awesome. Yeah, so basically today I'm talking about migrating type wells. That's something I've been working on with a few of the operators. And also I've been kind of diving into the monograph 5 and kind of seeing how we fit in and how we can improve with that as a guideline. But mainly, as I thought about what I really want to convey, it's mainly two key takeaways, right? Migration is not just moving data over from one place to another. So that's what I'll cover in the first takeaway. Basically, we'll talk about type well profiles, what Monograph 5 recommends in general, ideal Whitson Plus database and project setup that I think works for most people, but that sounds like a really fun discussion to be in. And then importing well forecast, save type well decline. So that's first part of the takeaway. That might be more leaning towards the data integration and project setup kind of side. But then the second part of my talk, I wanted to focus on the Monograph 5 workflow steps and then walk through how Whitson fits into each one of these steps and how you can basically work through the whole workflow steps purely on Whitson, whether it is building the type well or adding a forecast or creating one, importing, exporting, all of that, right? The one last thing that we probably would love to receive feedback on is the uncertainty assessment piece, but we can talk about that at the end of this presentation. So speaking about type wells, why are they important? Mainly they inform production forecasts, economic evaluations, they help scope out plays, and they effectively influence our decisions on what influences production. And effectively, we can iron out the differences between completion parameters, subsurface parameters, and things like that. The idea is that these type well profiles and type well construction tasks really reduce the risk and uncertainty of the operation we're in, and helps constrain the hopefulness or the bias that we walk into these forecasts with. And then it also helps justify and support multi-million or million-dollar decisions, right? And just from the outset, I'd like to clarify, like type curves refer to idealized production plots based on equations. It may be analytical or numerical simulations to which actual production data results are compared. So it's basically the old way of basically using Petkovich type curves and things like that, where you slide your production data on top of like these type curves, and then you say, hey, this might be my reservoir properties and things like that. But type wells that we're doing today are basically based on actual well production data, and they represent a typical production profile for a collection of wells for a specified duration. And that typical can vary from organization to organization, but most typically it's either the P50 or geometric mean or arithmetic mean, any kind of an averaging function that makes sense for you guys. Okay, but more often it's either the geometric mean or the P50, but it depends on the data set as well. Now, just a quick example, the type curve that I earlier referred to looks a lot like this. This is what I was referring to when I said you could slide your production data along this curve and get a match, and then that would be your reservoir parameters. Great work on the left over here. And then on the right, this is mainly statistical, where we're basically averaging the production data across time, and we're getting a sense of what the median rates across time look like. And that's a screenshot from Whitson. So we'll jump into that in a few slides here, right? But mainly the four things that we want to look at when we're doing type wells is the rate time plot, the cum versus time plot. We want to look at the rate versus cum plot, and we also want to QC our analog well selection, our P10, P90 ratios using the probit plot. So 4 of these plots are important. All of those 4 plots are Whitson plots, so you should be able to do them all on Whitson, right? And now, quick introduction to the Monograph 5. Great work by the principal authors here, Jennifer and Rick. and they're actually training a lot of folks, and I was in one of them earlier this year. And effectively, this is work published in December 2024, the monograph 5, and it outlines the practical guide to type well profiles. Apart from that training, another great resource is basically the presentation from our friends over in Canada, from Oventive. Kevin Hansen actually did a great presentation reviewing the guidelines. So that you can actually access through this recording link here, but I won't get into all the details and nuances that are discussed in the monograph 5, mainly because it's covered really well here, covered excellently in the book. But mainly I want to highlight the steps laid out by the monograph 5. And the workflow that they highlight is that it moves through these steps, right? You select analogs, you normalize them, then do you do a history only or a history plus forecast? And then you time shift the data, you truncate if you're using only history only, and then you finally parameterize the type well profile by setting up a decline and getting your parameters, right? That's one way to do it if you're using the production averaging method. The other method is the parameterization method. And in that case, what you do is you basically select your analogs, normalize them if necessary, then set up a common decline forecast template. Now, this has to be multi-segment and as many segments as you need to well represent your data, but effectively you're fitting every one of your wells through the same template. So if it's 3 segments, every one of the wells has 3 segments. So you get 3 sets of decline parameters. And then once you do, you can forecast the producing life using the established template. And once you do, you basically can aggregate those decline parameters instead of aggregating production data to get your type well profile. Okay. So both of these methods, I want to basically at the end of this talk prove that you can kind of work through all the steps on Whitson Plus. And I want to show you some examples with some screenshots to show you that, right? Now, ultimately, at the end of the migration exercise, what should it lead to? It should lead to a point where this question is not so scary. This question can be answered in a second. And then the other point is that it doesn't feel like such a stressful question at all. So, and to be able to do that, some of the things that are really important is that this is a data problem 90% of the time, and then the 10% of the time is the guideline or the lack of it problem, right? So the minimum data needs are effectively, when you're going about this exercise, you need your production profiles, and that means you need production profiles for your operated wells, your non-off or offset analogs that you're including in the type wells, and maybe you need access to good data sources, even if that's public, right? And we have great import interfaces to public data sources, so you can use one of those. Some of it's been covered in the presentation earlier with Rahul. And the well header data, that's basically parameters for validating selection criteria, maybe building some custom attributes and for normalization and things like that. But effectively, you can go about the type well exercise without ever including the well header data, but that removes you from half the problem because you need to normalize, you need to be able to remove wells that are not fitting those selection criteria. And that could be prop in pumped or lateral links or these other things that may not come with the production data, right? So that's what I mean when I talk about header data. And then there's forecasts. So the recommendation is to build history plus forecast kind of type wells. So we'll talk about that, but mainly you want to also import or be able to create and compare your declines. On top of that, because this is a type well exercise, we're going to come back to this again next quarter. So you want to be able to archive them and track those changes over time for future type well seasons. Yeah. And then Jennifer and Rick would agree, documentation is a big chapter in their book as well, that reproducibility is key. Effectively, type well season should not feel like tax prep season, right? That's the point. And so when you're documenting it or when you're migrating this, it's important to not lose some of that information. So what can help in that sense is when you look at all of these problems, it looks like all your ducks are all over the place, but automation can help to some degree get your ducks in order and then make them look good, right? On that, we actually have different interfaces to allow that automation to happen regularly overnight. And depending on how you want to set it up, either you can set up that pipeline over on your end, or you could also share your data tables based on the template that we share. Basically, we share a template that outlines what we need. and then you share that limited amount of information, and we basically always look at that as a source on Snowflake or Databricks or SQL or things like that, and we can always handle that pipeline for you, right? Yeah, and with that, and mainly this is primarily, I focused the production data part here because this is the best way to get production data in. You don't have to manually upload production data, and this would take away 90% of the hassles of building type wells or anything, doing anything decline related. Now, what's the plan? So the ideal setup is that we think that there should be a reserves database, right? And the recommended projects that recommended style that seem to work for a lot of reasons is that one, you need to have a daily project. Let's call that all your operated wells and your internal data. And that's where you would do all your RTA and other well performance analysis, right? You might have a bunch of comparison plots. You might have a whole bunch of scenarios where you have your own interpretations. All your results are pointing towards RTA, right? Then the second type of project that's typical and kind of coming up a lot is the monthly project. And maybe you might create a project that houses all your non-op wells and public data sets, right? So in any given field, let's say Eagleford, you might have a daily project with all your operated wells, a monthly project with all your basin-wide data sets and things like that, which track offset well performance and competitor data. And then what you do is you basically create a reserves or a type well project and make it such that all the wells that are in the type well project are actually linked to either the daily or the monthly projects. Make sense? So any well that is included in the type well creation should be basically added to this project and then linked back to the daily and monthly projects. And why such a design is because there's been popular requests to restrict access to the reserves of the type well project, which is a fair ask, which is not possible if all your type wells or your declines are in the daily project, right? It's also a very the daily project is where I assume most of the work will be every day, while the reserves or the type well project may be something that you might want to revisit every few months. Okay, so what do we need in terms of the integration or automation changes, right? Most of the companies that we work with already have this automated, where the first one, the daily project, or at least the operated wells that they have data for, is all streaming in without any issues. And then that's ready, right? Now, the only thing that's missing might be the monthly project. Maybe they have NVERS data sets that they need to upload every few weeks. Or maybe there's a non-op database that they house internally that they would like to get connected and automated for that project. And so effectively, if you had those two sources, right, one for internal data, one for public data sets, you could totally push that production data to daily and monthly projects only. And then you can push the well parameters, any parameters that you might have your hands on, to both the daily or monthly projects and the reserves projects both. And why? Because remember I spoke about linking the wells in the reserves project? That's mainly important because that keeps the wells live without actually making manual changes to production history. Okay? It also keeps the reserves project always tied to the source data sets for traceability. And it also ensures that these linked wells are linked in production history and wellbore data. So it also ensures that in the type well project, nobody can change the production history or modify it. You can always smooth it, but you cannot delete, edit, or any of that with the production data in the type well project, right? So, and then the last and my favorite part is tracking new wells against the type well profile is basically just a Control-Shift-R away every day. I like that. I mean, I sometimes do bookmark if there's a type curve that I'm working on every day, I like to bookmark it, and then basically every other day I could just click that link and then take a look at updated production data. And why I say it's just a refresh away is because all your daily production data, which gets pushed to daily or monthly, also filters down to the reserves or the type well project. So that's taken care of. And your header information, which may be not that frequent of a push, is actually updating all three projects. So your data is intact, and this seems to work for a lot of companies. All right, so let's say automation or IT isn't helping. Sometimes you just have to roll up your sleeves and upload it yourself. So once you have this project, let's say you did create that reserves or type well project, now you have all your production histories from your operated and offset wells. you still have to upload forecasts, and maybe you don't need IT for that. Maybe you don't have a database for that. So maybe all you need to do is go to your Aries or wherever you house your economic case data, and you just need to export that with a few clicks, and then you can come in here into Whitson, go to the wells page, mass upload, and then within the mass upload, we're actually working on building interfaces for importing forecasts now, because that's pretty much requested all the time. So Aries has been our first one that we built, I believe. And then what we do over there is basically once you have that exported file from Aries, you can basically specify the mapping, as in if your Aries is exporting forecasts with Propnum, maybe you have Propnum somewhere in Whitson as a custom attribute or as one of the default fields. And you might have to specify that to tell the software that, hey, this forecast ties to this well. And then you need to name the forecast, whatever that may be, year-end 24, year-end 23, whatever you're bringing in, and click upload. And that should take care of everything needed. And you should have your declines in each of your wells. That's basically, you're only halfway through, right? All your input data is in, all your projects are set up well, they're all streaming in production data automatically. But effectively, you're halfway through, because the next thing you need to do is basically build your type well architecture, right? Now, going back to the Monograph 5 workflows, right? The first step, if I'm building a type well, is analog selection and filtering. So as you can see, folks who've been using Whitson for a while, you used to have only well information data, reservoir properties, and completion metrics. But effectively, we always calculated the production metadata, which was used in different places for calculations. But we're now displaying that data, and we're also allowing all of these variables to be chosen when it comes to filtering. Right. So I want to show off this filtering screen here. That's also new, where effectively what you can do is you can layer on filtering criteria. It could be multiple filtering criteria joined by the and or the or. And then you can also lasso your wells and basically have that dictate which wells are getting selected in the type well. And also you can, right from there, you can actually go to actions and then create an auto forecast, create a type well, create a comparison plot, or best option of all is group. So the first thing I like to do is basically group the wells, right? So if this is not, this is not where you want to filter it or bring in conditions like this. You may have a well list somewhere, or from your previous type well exercise, you may say this type well profile is built by 15 wells, and you have 15 well API 14s. You can basically drop that in this box here, like you see where you have all these rows, and it will filter to those wells, right? And the last thing I wanted to add is that you can color by a certain attribute. You can also generate a bubble map based on a different attribute. So here I'm basically making bubbles based on the lateral length and coloring them by the peak rate. And these are the wells I've kind of selected for this exercise. And then ultimately, I said we could make groups, right? Why do we need groups? Because on a company level, we need to be able to communicate with each other what our final analog well selection is. So my idea was, or our idea was, that we basically all the experiments that I'm running personally, I might create a private group for, and I might have some private type wells built to test it out. But effectively, once the group is final, or once the selection of wells is finalized, you may want to create a company-wide group. A company-wide group basically is available to everybody. So when my colleague goes in and tries to build a type well for the small Kahuna brisket wells, he or she can basically look at these two groups, add the relevant wells, and go on about without actually worrying about whether I'm using a different well set. So that's basically all prep, right? The next thing you do is you actually build your type wells. Right. The main way in which we envision that happening is that maybe you have two different type well areas. I've kind of made up these dummy names, Big Kahuna Play and Small Kahuna. And effectively within that, I have one area called Kenwood, and within the Small Kahuna, I have one area called Brisket. And the idea is that you see how I have company-wide and private type well profiles here. So the private ones, I'm just testing something out, and I haven't confirmed what I really want out of it. So maybe I'll just keep it aside. But effectively, my entire company is using the normalized lateral length version. So that's company-wide. And this is something that we're trying out, but we all know that this is what we need to refer to. Okay, and I have similar setups for my other areas, and then basically this is how you would set up your own place. And once you have all your type well profiles and the different areas built in, it actually looks really good and kind of becomes a living, breathing document right here. So once you have these cases set up, you can basically add or basically while you're setting up the cases, you'll have all the groups that are relevant to that case added. So here I'm basically adding the brisket wells. I'm looking at the brisket type well profile. This is a history only type well profile. You see how quickly this well count drops here? And that's what monograph 5 suggests. It suggests that effectively using history only might lead you to a point where you have survivor bias and you're looking at propped up rates based on the wells that are not shut in at that point. So it's really hard to tell whether you're doing the right job of truncation of the type well profile, because in this scenario, you do need to truncate it here because your well count is drastically decreasing. But effectively, if you're basing that just on the rate profile, it may be very not clear where you should truncate it. Right. You can also see the probit plot and the GIS up there. You have a table here with all the relevant properties that you might want to add. So it's easy to quickly copy and paste into presentations and stuff. Yeah, so you basically normalize in this type well profile and you do a quick QC using the probit, but effectively you don't want to build history only type well profiles because of what we discussed. Right? You want to be able to include the forecast for each individual wells and then let the type well profile be a function of the averaging and no forecasts, right? So in this case, you average the production history and then forecast that. In this case, you average the entirety of the production history and the forecast from each individual well. The best part is that once you append that decline curve analysis on each one of those wells, you can also generate a probit of EURs, and you can see if you're drifting away from homogeneity there. All right, and then that's about if you have forecasts, right? So we already discussed how to import forecasts from Aries or other places, but what if you didn't have them and you were to create them just like Rahul did? So what I have here is that I have the same architecture replicated in the auto forecast section so that they kind of tie one to one, and I can basically easily switch back and forth between the decline that I'm appending, also the type well that I'm building, and things like that. So you see, I have the big kahuna play. I have Kenwood 1P, Kenwood 2P. And the main reason why I have two different ones for 1P and 2P is mainly because I might have different initial settings or assumptions for my 2P versus 1P, and maybe that's my basis for keeping them separate. In this case, you see in the small kahuna, I'm keeping them separate because the company-wide one uses a ratio forecast, but I'm trying to test something that's basically built on the primary forecast. Yeah. So this is how you might want to collaborate, and you might want to set up the company-wide and private type wells and auto forecasts to effectively do this. Okay. Then in terms of the auto forecast options, I just wanted to show you some of my favorites. So, and also this also leads me to the discussion about parameterized type well profiles, where in this instance, when we're initializing this well or this auto forecast fit, we're basically using the modified ARPS, which is a 2-segment decline. And we're setting that up against the oil, gas, and water, and we're basically collecting the decline parameters for that. So that's part of the exercise that we looked at earlier today, where we could run an auto forecast on a whole bunch of wells and collect the decline parameters. And in a sense, what you're doing is you're basically fitting a template called the modified ARPS onto all of your wells, and you're extracting the results, right? So a multi-segment template, I would imagine, is not that far away from here, right? The second thing is that once you have all your once you fit all your wells, you can save that case and push it to each one of these wells included in this table, right? So once you click save here, if you visit any of these wells and look at the decline curve analysis in them, you will see a saved case that's called brisket_2p, and you'll basically be able to compare that. Now, this is Forecast Manager, something Matthias talked about earlier. And what I have here is basically I have my current forecast, the brisket 2P, and I'm comparing it to a forecast that I built from last year, year-end 2024. So I'm comparing the current one with the year-end 2024. And in terms of the table, I can add all of these parameters, like in terms of results, like segment parameters or inputs, forecast parameters, and things like that. I can also plot, calculate custom attributes. And here on top, you see, you're looking at results. You're looking at the error with respect to production data. You're also looking at the hindcast that we just looked at, where you're taking this forecast and you're basically calculating the difference with respect to historical production data. And in this column here, compared to, you're basically calculating the difference of this case with respect to the compare to case, right? So you're seeing how did your forecasts vary between then and now? And this is basically one step closer to kind of estimating variance of your forecasts as a part of the uncertainty assessment later on. So we have all the pieces, and the last thing I wanted to show you in terms of touching upon that parameterized decline or parameterized type well profile is, you see, I'm plotting my 2P curve and my year-end 24 2P curve, and these are my decline parameter distributions. And if I took the P50 of each one of these and call that my decline on the type well profile with the same decline template, then that would definitely be one way to build a type well profile for sure. All right. And then the last step of this is basically the parameterization part of it. How you parameterize may totally depend up to you, but effectively it's the process of setting up your segments, planning where they switch, how much RAM, or what kind of decline parameters you use. So effectively, you're breaking that type well profile into decline parameters, or basically you're describing that type well profile as decline parameters, and that's what you mean when you say parameterization. All right, and then lastly, let's say I have a type well built for the brisket wells. That's what I'm seeing here in the purple. And then I also built a type well actually for the Kenwood wells. Now the question is, how do I bring both of them into the same plot to compare? Maybe that's wells from the same area that I really want to look at together for a quick confirmation. So what you can do is you can click this import type well button. Oh, never mind. But effectively, this is what I'm pointing to. I don't know if you can see my cursor, but the import type well button is what will bring in type wells that you build or saved cases that you have in other type wells into this type well, so you can compare. Yeah. That's pretty much all I had actually. So in terms of recap, going back to the Monograph 5 workflows, we kind of worked through most of these steps. We selected analogs. We could normalize analogs if we wanted to. We definitely can time shift analogs, be it peak rate or starting at 0, or any other finite day that each well should start at. You can also average production history or production history and forecast, and then you should be able to truncate the type well profile as necessary. Ultimately, you do want to parameterize it. And similarly, I want to put green check marks on the parameterization method as well. But then this one, I'm going to do a yellow because basically we can fit a 2-segment decline template at the moment. That would need to be updated, and ideally maybe 4 segments or 3, something like that. That's pretty much it on my presentation. And hopefully that was quick and easy and not that overwhelming, but it's honest work at the end of the day and receives many thanks, to be honest.
Excellent. The Whitson event is done on time for once. You know, that's well, I guess it's happy hour or lunch now, so it's good stuff. We just want to thank everybody that joined us today. Looking forward to seeing many of you at WhitCon here 2nd of October. If you have any questions about that, just let us know whenever, and reach out to Jessica or myself if you want to get more information about how to get registered, or even if you have a good topic to present. I'd love to hear from you as well. We're finalizing the speaker lineup, so be very good. Okay. We'll thank Teja and all the presenters as well, and everybody have a good weekend when that time comes.